Debbie Hines, who is a trial lawyer, a legal political commentator, former prosecutor, and has been our go-to person for an awful lot of legal stuff over the years, has a new book out, which I am holding in my hand here. It's called Get Off My Neck: Black Lives, White Justice, and a Former Prosecutor's Quest for Reform. And Debbie, welcome back to the program. I'm so glad. It's so exciting to have you on with your this is your first book, I believe, right?
This is my first book, Tom.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And it's beautiful. It's really well done. So what provoked you to write this? This is from MIT Press, by the way.
Correct. So, you know, Tom, I have wanted to write a book on criminal justice for a very long time, but somehow, like many people do, I convinced myself that I don't have enough time to write a book. I'm not going to be able to write a book. How am I going to fit that in my schedule? And then what happened was really 2020, which is where the title comes from, because in 2020, 4 years ago exactly, when everything came to a screeching halt in terms of work, lives, and everything else, then I had the time to write a book. So that's kind of how it basically started, but it's not something that I just thought of in 2020. It's something I thought of for a long time.
Yeah. And in this book, you go through the history of basically white supremacy and so-called, white justice, and then black lives being degraded by design. And then you get into prosecutorial reform and action. Well, let's just kind of walk through those. The white justice, the history. Start us with that.
So everything that happens in the criminal justice system stems back really to our first sin in this country, which is enslavement of Black people. And there were things that happened immediately after emancipation that just continued with where we are today in terms of certain crimes that were just targeted for Black people. Everything in this country, whether we want to believe it or not, it does stem from our first sin, which is enslavement of Black people. And it went from there to laws that were restricting of Blacks after emancipation, to Jim Crow, to 1994 and mass incarceration, and where we are right now is a direct product and a line that runs from that very beginning.
So how does that, well, I guess you've kind of described how that plays out. What are the steps that we should be taking to do something about this in your mind?
So, my mom, and I always start this way, my mother always had a saying, and she said, knowledge is key. So the first thing that I believe we need to do is to know how the criminal justice system works. We may know, or some of us may know, that it racially disproportionately incarcerates Black people, but why is that? And that is because of police and prosecutors. There's no other reason for that. And so we have to know how the system works. And I give a detailed description of how it works from the prosecutor and how things are done by design, in the fact that there is some police officers, as a part of the DOJ investigation of the Baltimore City Police, where they already had inserted in their police report the word Black male, as if everybody that was going to be arrested was a Black male. So we need to know.
You mean it's like a pre-filled out form?
It's pre-filled out with those two words, Black male.
Holy
obviously,
cow.
the other words, name, address, everything else is left blank.
This is today?
Well, I don't think it's anymore today, since the Department of Justice, as a result of their investigation of the Baltimore Police Department for several years after the Freddie Gray incident, they found that in one of the documents. So I don't think it's anymore today, but to say it's in the 21st century
sure,
today.
It's in just the last decade or two, yeah.
Yeah, we're not talking about something that happened 10 years ago. We're talking about something that happened at least since 2015, 2016.
Wow.
So we have to first start with, revamping the prosecutors' offices, but we can't end there, because we're not going to be able to get elected all progressive prosecutors. There are 2,400 state and local elected prosecutors. It's just a small amount of those that are progressive. So what we need to do is organize in terms of individuals. And I lay out things that individuals can do working with other racial justice organizations, things that they can do whether you're 22 or you're 92 to help get things along. There are already organizations, many that are out there already doing the work to eliminate the disparities, to eliminate cash bails, to make better laws so that we're not arresting second graders, third graders, fourth graders, ninth graders who are all Black. But they need more help. They need more people working with them. And there have been many laws that have changed. I mean, Virginia, which is nearby where I'm at in the District of Columbia, they were the first formerly Confederate state that eliminated the death penalty. That was done in either 2021 or 2022, and it was done by collaboration. It's not that the lawmakers in Virginia just decided this would be a good thing, but it was done by efforts of individual people helping with lawmakers, helping with progressive prosecutors, just fueling the fire to get that done. And that was no easy task.
Yeah, yeah, remarkable stuff. So, power of the prosecutor, power of the people, power of white allies, power of alliances. Summarize for us, please.
So in terms of,
I'm
yeah,
sorry,
I can summarize real quickly.
Yeah.
So in terms of prosecutors, there are things that lay right directly within the prosecutor's control. They can decide tomorrow that they're just not going to prosecute cases that are misdemeanor, nonviolent cases. And that's really where I want people to know that's the bulk of the cases in the system. There are 13 million misdemeanor cases that run annually through the system. The vast majority are Black individuals, but those are nonviolent issues. There are a lot of traffic issues, a lot of possession of drug issues, and the prosecutor can decide those are we're just going to decline to prosecute. And the studies show that that does not increase crime because we're talking about nonviolent misdemeanors, which is the lowest of the lowest fruit.
Now, if I could just
Sure.
jump in here on that. Here in Portland, we had a prosecutor who was doing that, who was refusing to prosecute things like shoplifting, drug possession.
Sure.
And there's been just a huge blowback because the shoplifting problem just got out of control. The drug use issue got out of control. In fact, our legislature just changed the law. We had decriminalized all drugs. You know, I'm not trying to promote the broken windows theory of policing or anything like that, but isn't there a case to be made for actually prosecuting small crimes? Just let's not do it based on race?
No, there isn't. And I'm going to tell you why.
Okay.
Because there are many reasons why crime occurs. And then there are other places, not maybe Portland, but there are other places throughout the U.S. that are using restorative justice measures. They're not looking at every crime, every person the same way. They're not saying for every shoplifting case, we're going to give them jail time. But what they're doing is on an individual basis, defining what that person needs. And that may be different for each and every person. So in addition to declining to prosecute, but putting people in diversion programs, do they need to get an education? Do they need a high school diploma? Do they have mental health issues? 50% of people in jail have mental health issues, whether they're shoplifters or something else. But a vast majority of people that are in jail serving smaller sentences, they have mental health issues, so they need treatment. Same thing for people to have substance abuse issues that are shoplifting. They need treatment. Jail is not going to do anything because once people are in jail, they've lost a lot of opportunities and they're going to potentially come out and commit the same crimes again. So when we're talking about declining to prosecute, we're also talking about helping that individual. And I'm going to say one thing, that help is available when the vast majority of people are white people. That help is just not there for Black people. And there's studies that are out there that I tell about in my book that show that when it's the same type of scenario that you're talking about and it's a white individual, they will get treatment in the court system. The case will be dismissed. They'll get treatment of some sort. And so, no, I'm not saying let's just charge everybody and just do it in a non-racial way. I'm saying that for these misdemeanors, which are 80% of the criminal justice system, that clogs our system and makes us the highest incarcerated system in the world, there are other things that we can do to help people that does not increase crime. And I lay those things out.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we found here in Portland is that when the state decriminalized drugs, there was supposed to be a big pot of money for treatment programs, so that instead of people getting arrested, they would get basically a traffic ticket that they could avoid paying if they went into a treatment program.
Correct.
And the treatment programs never became available. But there has been this ongoing problem with shoplifting and public urination and stuff like that. That our DA is going to be recalled or voted out to Mike Schmidt. He's become real unpopular as a consequence of this, and I don't think it's entirely right-wingers.
No, but I also realize that when I say knowledge is key, I think if people understood how the system works,
right,
then they would be more willing to support progressive prosecutors like DA Schmidt. They would be willing to do that when they know that there are other cities, counties across the country that are doing things, and it has made a difference.
Right.
It has not increased crime. I mean, they're in Baltimore, for instance, when during the pandemic, when the state's attorney at that time declined to prosecute, Johns Hopkins University did a study that found that all those people who were declined prosecution, that they did not go back and create additional crime. And so a part of it is just providing people with resources, which we never tend to do when the people are Black and brown people.
Yeah.
But if people knew how it worked, then they would be more willing to not do the default, because the default is we need more jail time for these people and we need to prosecute more. We need to prosecute more crimes. But that doesn't make us safe. And studies have borne that out. And some studies have been very large studies. Manhattan, New York did a study of 200,000 people. It doesn't make us safer. And so if we want to be safer, we need to do more, because we're spending billions to incarcerate millions of people, and we're not safe. If that would have done the trick, we would have done it a long time ago. We have to look at doing things in another way.
You're right. And many other countries, do not have this problem that we do of mass incarceration. You're absolutely right. Debbie Hines, the book is Get Off My Neck, Black Lives, White Justice, and a Former Prosecutor's Quest for Reform. Debbie, good luck with the book, and thanks so much for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom.
It's always a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, These men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Tuesday. What a beautiful day it is here in the Pacific Northwest. It's kind of cold, actually. So those of you in the rest of the country who've been suffering under incredible heat, the cold is coming. Anyway, a lot to talk about. Kamala Harris has now secured enough delegates to have the presidential nomination of the Democratic Party. Enough pledged delegates have come forward out of the, almost 4,000. Enough have come forward and said, yep, I'm voting for her, that she's got it in the bag. So, the next step is who's going to be the vice president. And I'm betting that we will know that tomorrow. It's just, it's a guess. I'm not really betting. I'm guessing that we will know that tomorrow. But you can kind of see it, feel it in the wind, as it were, that this is coming. And so anyhow, we'll talk about all this stuff. J.D. Vance's audacious attack. He demands Kamala Harris show gratitude to white male power. This is pretty bizarre. Also, maybe voters just aren't all that into him. So we got a little J.D. Vance news here. Also, a fascism alert. Another Trump ally threatens civil war if the Republican Party loses the election. In the second hour of our program, David Pepper's going to drop by. He's got an Ohio Purge update. What's going on in Ohio? What are the Republicans up to there to keep Democrats from ever winning any kind of statewide office? Also, Biden calls for justice for Sonya Massey, the most recent horrific police shooting. This actually even got President Biden to say something about it. A brand new fail by Elon. And Joe Conason is going to drop by in our third hour. He's got a new book out, How Grifters, Swindlers, and Frauds Hijacked American Conservatism. And we're doing that in the first half of the third hour. Okay, so if in the third hour, if you want to call in, we'll just be taking calls after that. So don't forget the second half of the hour. You can call in. We'll be talking with you. But Joe's going to be with us for a half hour. A lot to talk about. He's got a great book. So J.D. Vance, let's start out there. Yesterday, and this is my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, J.D. Vance's Audacious Attack Demands Kamala Harris Show Gratitude to White Male Power. And yesterday at a campaign stop in Ohio, J.D. Vance said that Kamala Harris shouldn't lead the country because she isn't grateful for it. Seriously, this is what he said, and I quote. He said, you know what I see? Want to take bets here? Want to start a betting pool just in this auditorium? If you want to lead this country, you should feel grateful for it, a sense of gratitude. I never hear that gratitude come through when I listen to Kamala Harris. What's he talking about here? I think, I've got my secret GOP decoder ring here. And, the white myth of America, which J.D. Vance echoed at his RNC speech, I mentioned that at some length yesterday, is that our nation was built by white men. Of course, ignoring the black, Asian, Hispanic labor and that of women of all races that actually built much of this nation. And for the record, Kamala Harris is the parent of two immigrants, and explicitly, just one from India, one from Jamaica, and just comes right out and says all the time, as part of her standard stump speech, how her parents came to America and found a land of opportunity, and whoever thought that a little black girl from wherever, I guess she lived in Wisconsin actually for a while, could grow up to be vice president of the United States. She's clearly grateful for America. And that's why it's fairly obvious that when J.D. Vance said this, he wasn't talking about real gratitude or expressions of gratitude. What he was talking about was that she's not sufficiently deferential. that women, particularly black women, but women in general, and I'll expand on this in a moment, need to be humble in the face of white wealth and power. And instead of, gratefully deferring to the white men who are born to rule, she's a pretender to the role of president, a usurper of the power and privilege that never should have been in the hands of a woman, particularly a woman of color. I mean, keep in mind, this is the same J.D. Vance who, along with 8 other Republican senators and about 25, I think 24 members of the House, Republican members of the House, one of those other senators was Ted Cruz, by the way, who's also up for re-election this year, wrote a letter to HHS Secretary Javier Becerra. What was that letter about? Well, Javier Becerra issued a rule. He runs Health and Human Services, and he issued a rule nationwide that says that police cannot demand the health records of women, menstruation records, pregnancy records, whatever. What the Republicans are particularly interested in is menstruation records. That police cannot just go to a doctor's office or a hospital and say, I want the records of this woman so-and-so, without a court order. And so J.D. Vance and Ted Cruz and 6 of their colleagues in the Senate, Republicans, wrote a letter to Javier Becerra saying, you can't do that. You need to immediately withdraw that rule. Why? Because they want police to be able to access the menstrual and other health records so that prosecutors and police in red states can keep track of women. This is the menstrual police. Can keep track of women and find out when they're pregnant, and then, catch them if they order some mail-order mifepristone, or if they travel out of state to get an abortion, they can nail them. I mean, I'm not even speculating here. They will tell you that. I mean, Vance and Cruz and the Republicans on the Supreme Court, they're all big fans of the menstrual police. Why? Well, because when women can't control their reproductive capacity, it's very difficult for them to sustain a career in the workforce or in politics, which is exactly what Republicans, the goal of Republicans is to remove women from the workforce, competition for men, and from government. Pretty straightforward stuff. And so, now it kind of falls into context that Harris's lack of a submissive attitude of gratitude to rich white men like Trump, Vance, and the billionaires who own the GOP, and, is the logical result of the white men on the Supreme Court in 1965 in the Griswold case, which legalized birth control, and in 73, the Roe v. Wade case that legalized abortion, letting her have a career as a district attorney and a prosecutor and a state attorney general and the vice president. They let her, and she's not grateful for that. She's not sufficiently appreciative. I mean, J.D. Vance is pretty clear about this stuff. In 2022, when he was running for the U.S. Senate, which, by the way, was his first and only public experience, public office experience. This was the same year, by the way, that a 10-year-old girl who was raped by a relative had to flee Ohio to get an abortion. He represents Ohio. In 2022, he was asked, do you think that there should be exceptions for rape and incest in the state's abortion ban? And he said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Rape followed by an abortion, that's 2 wrongs. 2 wrongs don't make a right. He added that the fetus or the zygote should take primacy over the woman. Which is more important? Well, here's a verbatim quote. He said, it's not whether a woman should be forced to bring a child to term, it's whether a child should be allowed to live, even though the circumstances of that child's birth are somehow inconvenient. That question really, to me, is about the baby. In other words, forget about the woman. This is all about babies. Noting that women today regard children as, quote, inconveniences to be discarded instead of blessings to cherish. This guy, who in 2019, by the way, converted to Catholicism, added in an interview with the Catholic Current newspaper, he said, there's something comparable between abortion and slavery. I think it has a morally distorting effect on the entire society. He went on to argue that the Comstock Act, which outlaws any device that can be used to produce an abortion or any drug that can be used for abortion from being sent through the mail, FedEx, UPS, or any other common carrier. The 1874, I think it is, Comstock Act, which is still on the books, as Clarence Thomas pointed out recently from the bench in the Supreme Court. The Comstock Act would end all abortions in America. And J.D. Vance has come out and said, we need to enforce the Comstock Act. Well, that'll shut up those uppity, ungrateful women. He's also apparently upset that women have the right to no-fault divorce. He's come out, this is another one of his great quotes. He says, this is one of the great tricks that I think the sexual revolution pulled on the American populace, which is the idea that, like, well, okay, these marriages were fundamentally, they were maybe even violent, but certainly they were unhappy. And so getting rid of them and making it easier for people to shift spouses like they change their underwear, that's going to make people happier in the long term, end quote. He says sarcastically. He calls Kamala Harris a childless cat lady. He called AOC that also, and Pete Buttigieg. Now, for the record, Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg they're both parents of children. Kamala has two stepchildren with her husband, Doug Emhoff, from his first marriage. And Pete and Chastain, his husband, have adopted two children, twins, in fact. Sam Alito, in his Dobbs decision overturning Roe, might as well have said, a woman's place is in the bedroom and the kitchen, period. Remember how Mike Pence refused to dine with women other than his wife? Yeah, how very patriarchal, right? So, as Vance and Cruz will tell you, and they told Secretary Becerra, the job of men is to police women's menstrual periods and their travel so they don't do anything ungrateful, like getting birth control or an abortion or visiting a lawyer to get a divorce. Can't have that. You can read the whole thing complete with all the quotes and all the links to all the quotes over at HartmannReport.com today. For free. Easy. Don't even have to sign up. It's amazing stuff. I have some quotes from JD about Donald Trump I'll share with you. You probably heard most of them, but what the heck. And also some interesting stuff about, polling and just a whole bunch of interesting stuff. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Right back with you. Stay with us. And welcome back, Maverick in Edmonds, Washington. Hey, Maverick, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to say how much I've changed my position on Kamala Harris. I'll tell you what, Tom, I was really lukewarm on her. But, consuming a lot of media as I do, as much variety as I can, and looking at her demeanor on these her last several public appearances, my perception of this, the vibe across the country and how people are welcoming her, I have to say, Tom, that I'm more enthusiastic about her than I was about Joe Biden, and I was a huge fan of Joe Biden.
Well, let me add something to it. This is from one of the environmental newsletters. Kamala Harris was actually more aggressive on climate change than Joe Biden back in 2020. She called for a carbon tax. She endorsed banning fracking nationwide. She proposed spending up to $10 trillion to cut greenhouse gases and transition to clean energy. As a senator, she was an early endorser of the Green New Deal. She even proposed a more progressive target for reaching zero emissions. She said instead of 2050, it should be 2045.
Yeah, I was just going to say all that, too.
Isn't that incredible?
It's amazing. And, what's mostly important to me is that we don't let that animal, that maniac, get in power again. Yeah. And I was really concerned that, and, this may reflect poorly on me, but I'll be honest, I was concerned that perhaps the United States of America is not ready for a female president. And the fact that I had that thought, it bothers me. So I spent a lot of time thinking about it the last 48 hours or so. And I think I was wrong. I think we are ready for a female president, and a female president who doesn't look like her ancestors came from Europe. I'm hoping that we've risen to a level above that.
Yep.
And which brings me to her vice presidential pick. There's a lot of really qualified people out there. I feel like the Democratic Party has got we've got more people that I would call statespersons than just politicians, although there's plenty of politicians too. And I looked online all night last night to find the application for vice president because I wanted to apply. I couldn't find it, so I guess I'm out. But, I think Mark Pocan would be terrific. He's a very likable person, and he's very smart, and he's very progressive. Cory Booker, who speaks Spanish very well, I think could be an excellent choice. And J.D. Pritzker from Illinois, governor from Illinois, I think he'd be a pretty good choice, too.
Yep. He could also bring a lot of money to the thing. My guess is it's going to be Josh Shapiro. There is talk of Mark Kelly, but Mark Kelly is nowhere near as progressive as Kamala Harris. So Josh Shapiro is.
I don't think Mark Kelly or Josh Shapiro. Well, my opinion is I don't like them quite as much.
It's about bringing in Arizona and Pennsylvania.
But Jared Moskowitz, I think is his name.
Florida.
Is he from Florida?
Yeah.
So the geography might play into this a bit, and to have a guy from Florida, which is a really important state, that's also a part of the calculation, I think, as well. And he's a very smart guy, and he would do a great job.
And he's a warrior. Anyway. I mean, he loves to take it to the Republicans. Maverick, thanks for the call.
And Kamala's a fighter.
Yeah, she is. She clearly is. And it looks to me like Trump and Vance are running scared. They really look like they're running scared. Thanks a lot for the call. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Back in 1968, when Lyndon Johnson was president, Earl Warren resigned from the Supreme Court. He was a liberal, even though he had been appointed by Eisenhower. Johnson wasn't able to replace him, in part because of Republican opposition in the Senate. And so when Nixon came in, he had this opening, but he wanted to have two openings. He wanted to get rid of Abe Fortas, who was the most liberal member of the court. So he had his Attorney General, John Mitchell, start an investigation into Abe Fortas's wife. Now, there was nothing there. There was no smoke at all. She had done absolutely nothing wrong, and history has proven that. But they were going to drag her before a grand jury and possibly before Congress and just, drag her through the mud. And this caused Abe Fortas to resign, and that gave Nixon two openings, and that's how the court turned to the right. I'm suggesting that Democrats should do the same thing with Justice Thomas. I've got an op-ed about it at Hartmann Report. You can read it over there. Check it out.
In the boardrooms and the halls where the decisions fall, there's a silent shadow cast standing tall. From the fields to the factories, through centuries unbound, echoes of a power, deep and profound. Whispers of privilege, a legacy so deep, in the land of the free, promises they keep. But in the shadows where the stories entwine, truths untold, we seek to redefine. White male power, woven in the past, through the pages of history, shadows that last. But the time has come for voices to rise, breaking the chains, opening our eyes.
Welcome back. Another Trump ally threatens civil war if the Republicans lose the election. Nate, you've got the video on this, right? And the audio? Okay, here it is right here.
I believe wholeheartedly Donald Trump and Butler County's J.D. Vance are the last chance to save our country politically. I'm afraid if we lose this one, It's going to take a civil war to save the country, and it will be saved. It's the greatest experiment in the history of mankind.
Right.
And if we come down to a civil war, I'm glad we got people like Schmitty and the Bikers for Trump on our side.
We got some really well-armed people here. Not, don't worry about that. That was Ohio State Senator George Lang, and he's taking some crap for it. But hey, this is how Republicans talk. It's just incredible. It really is. Nikki Haley had a PAC. It was called the Nikki Haley PAC. They've renamed it. Seriously, the people who run the PAC, who were Nikki Haley Republican supporters, have renamed it. They've replaced her name with Kamala Harris's name, and they have said, we're going to give this money to Kamala Harris. I think it was called the Haley Voters for Biden, and it's now called, well, they don't say what the name of it is now, but it's got a new name. And they're giving their money to the Harris campaign. That's a good start. That's a very good start. Kamala Harris, by the way, more progressive than Joe Biden, which is pretty amazing. This is from one of the environmental newsletters that I subscribe to on Substack. Harris she was actually more aggressive on climate change than Joe Biden. She called for a carbon tax. She endorsed banning fracking, and she proposed spending up to $10 trillion. Keep in mind, we spent 2 or 3, I think, on cutting greenhouse gases and transitioning to green energy. This was in 2020 during the campaign. As a senator, she was an early endorser of the Green New Deal. She even proposed that we hit the targets for zero emissions in 2045 instead of the 2050 that we've all agreed to. So, and a former Republican pollster, Sarah Longwell, has also just jumped. She's now working to defeat J.D. Vance. She says his flip-flopping on Trump, his extreme abortion position, that's what's breaking through in the polling that's going on.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So what's on your mind? I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. Stay with us. Today is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on the birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries
where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development, and why women have better sex under socialism.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out.
Free, where the people stand tall. We've seen Trump rise and fall, and we've heard the call. With unity and hope, we can make a stand. Together side by side, we can heal this land. We've got the power in our hands, the strength of many in every heartland. We can win against Trump, we can take the lead. For a future bright where everyone is free. With the power of our voices, we'll break
There you go, 35 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls. What's on your mind? Oh, just a couple of, just before I pick up your calls, just Eric Swalwell is waving these around in Congress right now. So here's a few quotes from J.D. Vance about Donald Trump. Quote, "He's cultural heroin. He makes some feel better for a bit, but he cannot fix what ails them, and one day they'll realize it. I go back and forth between thinking Trump is a cynical ass like Nixon or that he's America's Hitler. The coddling of thug real estate barons who commit serial sexual assault. I'm going to vote third party because I can't stomach Trump. I think he's noxious. I don't think he actually cares about folks. My God, what an idiot. Trump is one of the USA's most hated, villainous, douchey celebrities." Yeah, that's what J.D. Vance had to say about Donald Trump. Oh, my. Susan in Phoenix. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to share about Mark Kelly, because you're right, he's not very progressive. Mm-hmm. About 8 or 9 months ago. Now, I've met him in person because I'm a PC and I've been at events with him. And so I emailed him directly and told him I was a PC in Arizona, and he answered me right away. And I shared how
precinct committee person?
Advantage. Yes, I'm also secretary for our LD.
Okay.
And so I emailed him directly and asked him, told him that Medicare Advantage was a scam, and I gave him some facts like the 17% that they were turned down on being covered, and we had to go for approval. And I told him how I believed it was a scam. And I gave him an article. And then he got back to me immediately and said, Medicare Advantage gives seniors a choice. And so defending it.
Yeah.
So I emailed him back and sent him more articles. And with that, he says, I'm going to turn this over to my team, and you can talk to them. Well, I never heard from them.
Right.
So to me, and then I just recently heard that he is not for Medicare for all either.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no,
I hope
he's more of a corporate Democrat, and Kamala Harris is very clearly a solid progressive, which makes me think that she probably won't pick him. If she does, it's a sign of how convinced the Democrats are that they need Arizona, frankly. Or that they need to reach out to white men, manly men, right? Because he comes across as a manly man. He was an astronaut. He's a military. He's a tough guy. He knows how to shoot a gun. He's got, he doesn't have any hair on his head, all that kind of stuff.
Yes. Well, I'm so excited about her, though. And I know she's energized the whole party, the way I see it. And I hope she goes for Gretchen Whitmer. I think what a powerful
Well, Gretchen Whitmer came out yesterday and said she doesn't want the job.
Oh, she did? I didn't hear that.
Which is why I think it's going to be Josh Shapiro, who is progressive and who is, who does represent a state that Democrats need, which is Pennsylvania. He's the governor of Pennsylvania. And
I think they'd be harder to take Pennsylvania than Arizona.
Yeah, and he knows how to take names and kick ass. But it's all speculation at this moment. Even if it is Mark Kelly or some other corporate Democrat, I will still vote for her and work for her.
Of course.
And I will believe that it's possible that people can change their opinions once they no longer need all that corporate money just to keep their Senate seat.
Yes.
Mark Kelly's in a state where it's tough for a Democrat to get elected. I understand that. So, but anyway, Susan, thank you for the call.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Devon in Pittsburgh. Hey, Devon, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Well, I'm kind of freaked out. You mentioned earlier purging voters in Ohio.
Yeah.
And I myself, someone who has never missed an election, including the entire time I've lived at this address, I got a packet from Allegheny County asking me to register to vote.
Oh, really?
And yeah.
Did you go to vote.org and check your voter registration? I mean, maybe it was a mistake?
Well, I have not yet, to be perfectly honest with you. I was rather disturbed that this packet was sent to me in the first place. And certainly I know how to, check my registration, and I can do that. But what about the other people in Pittsburgh that might be receiving these packets in the mail and wondering, wait a minute, am I registered? Am I not? Oh, screw it.
Is your Secretary of State a Republican or a Democrat?
I don't know.
Because that would be the public official who's in charge of purging the votes.
Well, that would be a good Yeah, right. Maybe I should call my Secretary of State, figure out who that is. Yeah, so it's very disturbing and just kind of fits a pattern here in Pennsylvania as far as, this whole election crazy cycle is
step
going.
Step on, find out if you were purged, and if you were, then, of course, re-register, and find out why you were purged and raise some hell about it, and then call back and let us know. If you weren't purged, then you have to wonder what's going on. Was it a mistake? Did somebody ask for it on your behalf? Are they hoping that you'll register again, and then they'll say, oh, she's registered twice. She's a voter fraud person. Let's just purge her altogether. I mean, there's a lot of different possible answers to this, and I'm just speculating here wildly, but you need to find out what happened, Devon.
I absolutely am going to get to the bottom of this, Tom, and I hope anyone else who receives one of these packets in Pittsburgh does the same.
Right, or anywhere in Pennsylvania.
Vote.
There you go.
Or anyone in Pennsylvania. Right.
Thanks, Devon.
Tom. Have a good one.
Yep, you too. James in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, James, what's up?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. I got a great business opportunity for you and me. Just don't tell anybody else. Just you and me will invest in this. It's a futuristic thing that's coming up. You were talking about women's rights, and I think we need to figure out who the companies are that are gonna have to start making chastity belts. You remember what those are, Tom?
I do, and I'll bet Jockey would be a great company to make those.
Yeah, you and me could just keep it secret, Tom. Nobody's listening. And listen,
pick up some of their stock,
Listen, I know Kamala Harris is listening, or she's having somebody listen. Yeah. She's going to hear this. She's a strong person, Tom. I need somebody to address Donald Trump on the amount of secret people that we've lost. I'm an old ASA guy. I was in the Army Security Agency, and we sat around on these precarious atolls. And I spent 10 months one time on top of one of these little mountains between hostile countries, and we're up there with nothing but our headphones and our secret equipment and stuff that we've got to destroy. And I was involved in one of those where we had to scramble to anyway, Tom, I'd like her to address Donald Trump on how many of these people that he had lost. To sit up there on one of these places and to think that your chief executive would give up your position, Tom, that's a nightmare that freaks me out to the point of...
Well, it's a noble gesture, actually. I mean, it very rarely happens in politics, here or anywhere else in the world. The people who have power, and being president of the United States is about as close as you can get to absolute power, particularly after the Supreme Court says you can break the law and not be prosecuted. So giving up power is an amazing, amazing thing, James. I mean, what Joe Biden did was not just selfless. It was, it's right up there with George Washington.
I talked to you about that last week, Tom, and you hung up on me when I said he had his mouth open. I'm sorry about that. But when he gave a slow salute, when he gave, and he was standing there dead fast, immobile at the Juneteenth celebration, and everyone else was dancing. And then when he gave a slow funeral salute to his Air Force guys, that really did it for me, Tom.
I got it. I think he's a fine president. It's clear in terms of campaigning that age has caught up. Yeah. James, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. Diane in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Hey, Diane, what's up?
Yes, hello. I would just like to, going through the weeks that we did and everything, I'm really saddened that Joe was removed the way he was. But maybe having COVID, he didn't have to see everybody's face the way they were looking at him, talking about him, and treating him. I think it was very disrespectful. I think the Democrats showed that they could be as Republican as any other Republican, the way they savage each other. But and I was also saddened that Governor Gretchen Whitmer was at a book signing just 15 minutes from me. I could have gone there and gotten a book signed. I didn't do it. And why I didn't go there is because of the way she treated Joe at his Motown rally in Detroit. He wasn't even there. and it was very obvious. That is a swing state. That is a big electoral state. She wasn't even there, and it was such a bad look. And found out that she was in Sun Valley, Idaho, with billionaires.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be a good team between Kamala and Joe. She's got a big tent, and she's going to keep him there, and he's going to be very good for her.
I agree. I agree. Diane, I'm sorry, I'm out of time. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. I'll be right back with your calls. Welcome back. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. As a white Caucasian male environmental scientist, I couldn't be more happier than having Kamala Harris as a president. She is extremely qualified. But I'm calling because I am worried that I would like to know what the Democrats are going to do when Trump loses the election and he goes to the Supreme Court, and these hacks definitely going to, rig it for him. Do they have a plan on how to deal with this? That's what I would like to know. And I take my answer off the air. Thanks.
I think, Alfredo, it's a fairly safe bet that they do. It took Democrats a couple of years to figure out how badly screwed they got in 2000. I mean, it wasn't until a year later that the recount, that was done by the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, Gannett, discovered that pretty much by any measure, however you determined it, Al Gore would have won the election in Florida. In other words, that election was stolen by the Supreme Court, the 2000 election, which brought us the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, Bush rolling back environmental policies. Last night, Louise and I were watching a show on TV, and it was about these detectives who were trying to figure out why all these people were dying in Nevada. And it turned out that there was fracking going on their land, and people's wells were poisoned, and you could light their water on fire coming out of their taps. And one of the detectives is like, "Oh my God, we got to nail the people who are guilty for this." And the head detective said, there's nothing we can do. The Bush administration just passed a new rule. Dick Cheney passed this new rule that it's not illegal for fracking water to contaminate local wells. There's nothing we can do about it. And that's true. I mean, that was what George Bush brought us. Thank you, Supreme Court, right? So anyway, I would be astonished if the Democrats do not have a solid plan for this. So, Patsy in Arroyo Grande, California. Hey, Patsy, what's up?
Hi, how about a vice president Joe pick with that ticket that will bring in the youth vote, the Latino vote, and the black vote, and you may not even need the old white men vote. How about Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez? She turns 35 in October, and she will be eligible.
Wow. Well, there's no minimum age for the vice president. Just for the president.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure there's not. I'd have to go back and read the Constitution to double check, but I believe it just says the president must be 35 years and a natural born citizen. But, if she turns 35 in October, it's a moot point because they don't take office until January anyway, January 20th specifically. Yeah. So that's interesting. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she would make a great vice president. I suspect because she's been out there so much and she's been kind of the person that the right loves to complain about and caricature and cartoonize, that she probably might bring more baggage. She might bring more baggage with her than Kamala can afford right now in terms of reaching out to middle-of-the-road people, and in particular reaching out to the Nikki Haley Republican voters. I think they're in play. And I think Alexandria might blow that up. But I could be wrong. I love her. I mean, as a politician, I think she is just extraordinary. She's so smart, and she knows the issues so well, and she's so careful and thoughtful. And she does her homework.
That's what I like about her.
She's just an amazing, amazing person. Patsy, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it.
We share our hopes, we share our dreams. In this talk show world, we're on the same team. From every station, coast to coast, it's our opinions that matter most. On the airwaves.
Welcome back. Stephen in Lexington, Kentucky. Hey, Stephen, what's on your mind today?
Hi, how are you this afternoon? I wanted to just, before I begin, Diane, the woman, was she from Michigan by chance? Is that where she was from?
I don't recall.
I didn't catch that part. Quite frankly, I think Biden was a little disrespectful. I'm glad that he had the good sense to resign. But, I didn't get a chance to cast my ballot in the primaries because they designated those two the nominees in March. The primaries went until June.
Yeah, and the primaries were not real primaries. I mean, there were no actual real challengers. All of the challengers are people just trying to build their own personal brands.
Well, exactly. And I was a little bit ticked off by that, quite frankly. I really like Kamala Harris, and I like the fact that she's willing to work for the nomination. She's just not wanting to be given it, And I have some appreciation for that. I really do. I think that I like the Gretchen Whitmer idea about her being vice president, but we need to win the election. And I don't know if we're ready to see two women on the ticket as of yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think at this point, Josh Shapiro would be wonderful, I think. I have a feeling it's going to be Mark Kelly, intuitively. I don't know why I have that feeling. Yeah. But I do think, though, at this point, I hear some people saying this is like 1968 all over again. Hubert Humphrey was a wonderful fellow. He was insipid, though. You need a candidate that has style and substance to win. Mm-hmm. That's what people don't understand.
Yeah.
Biden had the substance. He didn't have the style. Trump used to have an image of style, but yet we know that he's a pig based on the fact that he's been exposed as the biggest charlatan on the planet. Kennedy used to have style and substance, but he sold himself out to the highest bidder. So Kamala Harris has that style and substance, and that is something that you need. I think, though, I'm wondering, nobody's talking about this, but with Trump's cognitive decline and knowing how much of a wimp he really is, I'm wondering if Mother Nature might be taking her toll on him and whether or not it might be a possibility he might even not be in the race by October.
Well, we'll see. I hope he is, because I'd love to see him beat. But in terms of analogies, if Josh Shapiro is picked, and it seems to me like it's down to Shapiro and Kelly, but there might be some wild card that I'm not anticipating, because Gretchen Whitmer has said she doesn't want to be in the ticket. So Shapiro is clearly a solid progressive. Mark Kelly is more of a corporate Democrat. But if he is picked, I would say that the analogy is not 1968, it's 1960, when Jack Kennedy picked Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson was a notorious conservative. He was not the progressive who transformed America during his presidency, with the Great Society. He was a racist. He was a segregationist for much of his political career. But when he hooked up with Jack Kennedy, everything changed. And when Kennedy died, Lyndon Johnson, for LB, exactly. And so I'm always willing to give people the
well,
benefit of the
LBJ,
doubt.
I think what people don't really realize about LBJ is, though, I think the civil rights movement, he was in tune with it. He became, I think he showed his humanity more.
Yes.
And Johnson loved people, too. I mean, he was
Yeah.
from Texas, that larger-than-life hospitality. He and
Yeah.
Lady Bird both were. So I think that did make a difference.
Yeah.
Well, dear, thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Good talking with you. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Yeah, as far as Trump bowing out, no, he just doesn't have the profile for it. I mean, even
Well, I think she was talking about him, a hamburger getting to him, kind of thing. But
well, yeah, I was talking about the guy from Kentucky. He was talking about Trump bowing out of the race, wasn't he, Stephen? Wasn't he talking about that?
No, I think Stephen was suggesting that at 78 and obese, that his body might fall apart and he'd have to drop out, or he might even croak. Nobody's wishing that. Like I said, I'd love to see him just get beat.
No, yeah, but I mean, I just don't think he has. All right, what we call toxic leadership, the Republicans call, well, even tyranny. I've called it tyrannical, but they call that good leadership. And even Richard Nixon had some sense of leadership that Donald Trump just doesn't have.
Correct.
But the reason why I was calling is this medical surveillance, if you will, or gender-related reporting, gender-specific reporting. This has been going on for years in the military when we were in Iraq and Afghanistan because of General Order 1. People that can have children, all right? That's a good way to put it. People that can have children, they have to be monitored when General Order 1 says you cannot have sex, right? So this is what Cruz and J.D. Vance and all these guys get that Trump just doesn't. I don't think he has the intellectual capacity to get. Is if they have to make it look legitimate. They have to make it look like there's for a reason. Like in the military, Yes, the menstrual police thing. Look, when I was in the military, I had a female colonel. She told me to counsel a soldier that was subordinate to me because she got pregnant while she was on leave. But here's the thing: the colonel, mentioned something about menstrual this, menstrual that. I said, no, never mind. I'll just do the counseling.
Yeah,
but
I got it. Dave, I'm sorry I'm out of time. I got to run. But Dave, thanks for the call. We'll be back on the other side of this break. David Pepper's going to drop by and give us some insights into what's going on in Ohio. This is how Republicans hang on to a state. Pay careful attention. It's going to get amazing. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism. There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes, offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma that's now by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, perhaps not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policymakers to assume that this would necessarily happen and to overestimate how quickly communities affected by outsourcing would recover and how swiftly other sectors of the economy could compensate. In particular, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist David Autor has argued persuasively that the China shock, the dramatic offshoring that followed Beijing's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001, inflicted more economic damage on working-class communities in the United States than many experts anticipated, without generating the compensating growth and job creation expected elsewhere. This is not a knockdown case against free trade, just a case against overconfidence in its incautious application. And the same argument applies to other features of the neoliberal program. It's quite possible that lower tax rates spur growth and innovation when tax rates are cut from 70% highs, but also that a program of permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for-now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument, pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed too far as pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskanen Institute and Stephen Tellez of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy. in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism conjoined. Plutocratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents rather than innovation, and a service class that can't advance beyond its station. The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer because returns on capital will always be higher than simple economic growth unless some powerful force intervenes. The forces that intervened in the 20th century were the Great Depression and 2 world wars, which not only provided the impetus for massive government interventions, but destroyed outright a great deal of capitalist wealth. The book is The Decadent Society by Russ Douthat.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. On the line with us, our buddy David Pepper, the writer. His latest book, Saving Democracy, a user's manual for every American. Political activist, former elected official, adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Law. Served as chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party from 2015 to 2021. And writes a great newsletter over on Substack that I strongly recommend you subscribe to. It's absolutely free, as most are. davidpepper.substack.com will get you there. It's called Pepperspectives. And David, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Great to be back with you.
It's great to have you. I noticed in one of your notes that Kamala Harris had given you a call after, am I remembering that right? After one of your books?
Yeah, it was, as I described it in my newsletter today, it wasn't just that she called me, but it was what it was about. You know that you and I talk about this a lot, that the front line of the attack on democracy are the states and state houses. A lot of federal officials, I worry, don't see that. So we too often don't look at these state houses as the front lines that they are. And the reason Vice President Harris called me, and it was about a year ago, was because she had seen me on Morning Joe saying that. And she called me up to say, David, I so agree with what you're talking about. We need to do better. We need to do more. And as you know, the reason I wrote about today is now that she's a candidate for president, I can't be more excited that someone who hopefully, if we do our job well, is in that job, understands this state-based view of the problem. It's not only about a few swing states, a few House or Senate seats. It's about state houses, uncontested races, running down democracy in states, which then runs down the national democracy. She called me because she sees it that clearly, which was great then and even better now.
Yeah, I agree. And she understands her politics. Speaking of state-based politics, it has seemed to me for some time. In fact, I wrote a book called The Hidden History of the War on Voting back about 4 years ago. And I kind of came up with this notion at that time that once Republicans get a hold of a state, and in my opinion, the main way they do that is with right-wing talk radio, in a state where there's no progressive stations, but I could be wrong. But in any case, once Republicans get a hold of a state, they start messing with the election laws and they start purging voters in ways so that they never lose control of that state. And that certainly seems like what's going on in Ohio. You want to tell, first of all, I'd love to get your thoughts on that concept and how universal it may be. And then secondly, what specifically is your Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, up to?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The gerrymandering is part of it, but the purging of the majority that they are afraid of is a big part of it. And in a closer state, in Ohio, we all know Obama won by a few points in 8 and then 12. Purging of a certain set of voters in certain places can take a state that's winnable and make it hard to win. It can change the mathematics of winning. And when you look closely, and I write about this in both my books, when you look closely at the purging in Ohio, that's what's happened. I mean, the voting population of Cuyahoga County, Cleveland, That's the county that delivered the presidency to Barack Obama both times. Obama lost 87 out of 88 counties to Romney when you added up all 87. But the margin of victory in Cuyahoga County was enough to overcome all that. And he won. That's why Karl Rove was so upset in 2012. He knew it was over. But if you shave away enough of the votes that make up that majority you don't like, it can make a difference. And purging has done that in dramatic ways. I mean, I can show you numbers where even though populations in some cities have fallen, but not nearly as fast as the voting rolls have fallen thanks to purging. They've made mistakes. They have a big error rate. It punishes voters of color and poorer voters, the very coalition they're afraid of. And the thing this week, we had another round of purging on Monday. I'm not in Ohio right now, so I don't have the latest on what happened. But what I was pointing out over the weekend was there looks to be, now we'll see what the actual answers are, but yet again, it looked like in the purging process, there are at least very serious questions about who was on that list and why. Were they following federal law when it came to sort of the requirements that if someone updates their address for driver's licenses, it's supposed to be updated automatically as their address for voting? Some of the language they were using suggested they weren't doing that, so the Brennan Center asked them about that. We'll see, but this is a long history of using an antiquated voting purging process that has dramatically reduced one side of the two sides of Ohio politics. And I don't think it makes Ohio impossible to win, but the path to victory in Ohio now is far more difficult than it was for a Democrat than, let's say, 14 years ago or 12 years ago, because the side that votes for Democrats has been, minimized through all this horrific purging. And they just keep doing it again and again and again.
And we've seen this in state after state. I mean, Brian Kemp, when he was Secretary of State in Georgia and was running for governor against Stacey Abrams, purged 100,000 voters off the voting rolls just before the election, and then won by 50,000 votes. Surprise, surprise! Yeah. I mean, they did this in Arizona. They did it in Florida, Texas, Kentucky. I mean, or Tennessee. Excuse me. There's a bunch of states where purging is like, regular purging of the voting rolls, particularly in black areas. And now that the Supreme Court, in 2016, 2018. Legalized caging, sending out postcards and bouncing people when they don't send them back.
That was an Ohio case, and that 5-4 decision allowed it to go to other states. So let's be clear. There are lists that are generated when people move out of a state. It's called the National Change of Address List. So that's a very easy way to track how to keep your rolls clean. Someone moved from Ohio to Florida. Someone moved from, Cleveland to Cincinnati. They need to re-register, etc. There's also lists generated when people pass away. So there are ways to update your rolls on legitimate lists. What happened in that case, and is happening in some states, not all yet, hopefully it stops, but I'm afraid it can grow, they use infrequent voting as their trigger. And then they send a postcard. If someone doesn't respond to a postcard from someone they never heard of or someone they think is a Republican, then after a couple of years, they're off the rolls. It's when you introduce infrequency of voting as the trigger versus someone passed away and is on that list or someone moved is on that list. The infrequency of voting is the problem because a lot of people don't vote. A lot of people may forget to vote, choose not, whatever the reason. They have a right.
Or they just vote in presidential elections. I mean, that's very common.
Right. But the government is saying in Ohio, oh, you didn't vote a couple times in a row. That means in a few years, you may lose the registration entirely, which is a matter of government. Honestly, the government should be doing that.
Right.
Use the list of people that moved, fine. Update the rules accordingly. Find the list of people passed away, go for it. But the infrequent moving is what captures so many more people unnecessarily, leads to all the mistakes, and ends up meaning that poor people, people who move a lot, African Americans, as you said, they get caught up disproportionately in that part of the purging process.
Right.
That's the problem.
And 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court legalized this after, and with the postcards. I mean, this was called caging back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and for 30 some odd years, if my recollection is correct, the Republican Party operated under a court order, a restraining order, preventing them from doing caging. And then the Supreme Court came along and said, oh, no, it's perfectly legal. You can do that. I keep pointing out, and I wish the Democratic Party would turn this into a meme. I don't know. Maybe I'm just more fond of it than I should be. But if a state wants to take away your gun, they have to go to court. They have to prove, that there's a reason, a legal justified reason. if they want to take away your vote, they don't even have to tell you. Isn't that backwards from how it should be?
Yeah, I mean, and we're talking here, again, the process itself is flawed. But in 2018, when they released in advance a list that allowed us to look at it, people were on the list 20% of the time in complete error, meaning they had participated, but somehow they got put on a list as if they hadn't. So imagine if you're being deprived of any other right by pure government error. You show up to vote, you had been voting all along, and you're told, sorry, you were on that list, and you have no way to take it back at that point. Right. So we're talking about a really blunt force instrument depriving right to vote, which is absolutely full of ridiculous errors and also has a disproportionate impact. And you know, they don't change it because I think it's pretty clear they don't mind the results that it's leading to.
David, you're an attorney. I'm not, and in fact, you're a professor in law school. I would love to get your thoughts on this, and I know we've discussed it or kind of danced around it in the past, but the National Voter Registration Act, NRVA, also known as the Motor Voter Act, 1994, in the header of the law and in the black letter body of the law, in both places, it explicitly says voting in the United States is a right. Congress passed that. It was signed into law by President Clinton. Voting is a right. Why is it that a state can take away your vote without going to court? I don't get it.
No, I think it's a fair question. I think if we had different courts and different majority, we'd have voting much more secured as a right. Again, there are a lot of decisions that were changed in the 2016 election outcome. Citizens United would have been changed. The end of gerrymandering would have happened, and this is another 5-4 case that with a different result, without the Merrick Garland situation being held up. Right. I think issues like this. Now, again, good thing, and we got to get there, the next round of voting rights legislation that's sitting there to be passed, if we have majorities, will clarify this problem as well. And it will say, like I said, there are all sorts of lists you can use to update your voter rolls. People aren't against updating voter rolls. But to use infrequency of voting in the caging process you described under proposed legislation after that Supreme Court case would no longer be allowed.
Yeah.
And that would be a huge difference. And one other thing, by the way, I'm a big believer that yes, we're talking about this as lawyers, but there is something everyone can do about this right now. And I wish more did it. Some do. There is every single mayor, every single county commissioner who happens to be a Democrat could use the full power of their offices and their city halls to register voters that go into every rec center, homeless shelter, public housing unit. And I worry that as one side is attacking our voters relentlessly like Frank LaRose is, our public officials aren't as on it to say, hey, if you're in the city of Cincinnati or the city of Dayton and you are being purged by the state, I'm livid about it, I represent you, and I'm going to use the resources of my government. Wherever you interact, the health clinics of Cincinnati, for example, wherever you interact in my community, you will be asked for the opportunity to re-register. And if you did it the right way, those are the very places that the people most likely to be purged will be going,
That's
seeking
brilliant.
out job and family services. So I talk about this all the time in my Saving Democracy book.
Yeah.
We want to sue and win, but we need to be as dedicated to lifting voters back onto the rolls as they are removing the rolls. And I worry sometimes we're not keeping up with them when we have all the ability to do so.
The Thom Hartmann Program.
Yeah, the great David Pepper. Get over to Substack, davidpepper.substack.com, and sign up for Pepperspectives. David, thanks for dropping by.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. And welcome back. Tom in Wells, Maine. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call again. I actually know while we're all celebrating the candidacy of Kamala Harris, I wanted to shed some light, not exactly good publicity for this candidate or for the Democratic representative here from the state of Maine, but his name is Jared Golden.
Yeah, he's a corporate Democrat.
He's a Democrat, a very conservative Democrat. He represents a very conservative district, so you kind of get that idea when you hear him talk. And he's like one of the lone representatives that did not vote for the infrastructure bill in Congress. So
right. He's not just conservative. He's essentially on the take. He's part of the Problem Solvers Caucus. These are the Democrats and Republicans who proudly proclaim that they're on the take, that they're really happy to take money from corporate interests.
Right. Well, anyway, so I guess within the last few weeks, he did an op-ed in the local Bangor newspaper, and one of the few things that were kind of opened a few people's eyes, that raised a few eyebrows, was that one, he said he would not have a problem if Trump got back into office.
Oh my God!
And the other thing was that he felt that he wasn't a threat to democracy.
Oh,
and I just have
is this
to
guy
really
not paying attention?
My head.
Is he living under a rock?
I don't know what the heck he's thinking, to be honest.
He's taking too much money from billionaires and big corporations. That's what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, so far he hasn't endorsed Harris yet, and he says he's not going to vote for Trump. But gosh, I just can't imagine. I mean, I get the makeup of his district is very conservative, but it's hard to understand how the Democratic Party in that part of the state. See, I live in the southern part, and he represents the northern part of the state. I don't know how they could endorse his candidacy. I don't know why he couldn't be primaried, but and then I guess that probably would definitely you would not get a Democrat in that district. You'd be automatically a Republican.
Well, you don't know. You might be surprised. I mean, Bernie Sanders is incredibly popular among Republicans.
Yeah,
actually,
I just to me it's just like I just don't understand how he continues in office. But he has, like I said, he doesn't. He's withheld his endorsement. He might yet endorse Harris, but he hasn't done that yet. So we'll have to kind of wait and see. But he kind of made a little news with that recently, and that's just like, hey, just want to put it out there. It's like, and he also represents that district gets one electoral vote in each presidential election.
Right.
So Trump always makes a point of coming up to the state of Maine, the northern part of the state, because he wants that one electoral vote.
Right.
So
you just never know.
Yeah, you never know. Right. Okay.
Bernie is in Vermont. Vermont is part of the Northeast, like Maine is, and it's very rural. I lived in Vermont for almost 10 years. And it is, and Bernie gets elected it used to be every 2 years, now it's every 6 years, with a lot of Republican and independent votes, because he does a good job. I think that people like Jared Golden and Josh Gottheimer, I mean, we saw this with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez blowing out, I'm forgetting his name now, but the guy who used to be the kind of the head of the conservative Democrats. I think a progressive challenger can take him out. Tom, thanks for the call. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So MAGA Mike and the Republicans want a religious test for people running for public office. They want to know that you are sufficiently Christian to be worthy of being elected. Right. MAGA Mike is one of these 7 mountain evangelicals. There are 7 domains where these dominionists believe that we need to have religion completely take them over. Education, religion, family, business, government and military, arts and entertainment, and the media. Seriously. This is not what Jesus was preaching when he said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God's. This is the opposite, in fact, of what Jesus was teaching. It's the opposite of Matthew 25, where Jesus said the only way to get to heaven is by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, helping the poor. This is counter-Christian, anti-Christian, in fact. In fact, I think you could say it is the Antichrist's work. There's a piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
Do you have that fire in the belly, the courage to stand, to speak your mind, to lend a hand, voting up for democracy every single day. The power's in your hands, the choice is in your heart. From the smallest town to the biggest part, raise your banner high and let your colors show with the fire.
Welcome back. Did you know that Kamala Harris sued Barack Obama? When she was Attorney General of California, she sued the Obama administration because President Obama had just opened up the West Coast for fracking. And she sued him to stop. She said, she held a press conference. She said, we must take every possible step to protect our precious coastline and ocean. Yeah. So some serious stuff here. Some serious stuff here. Joe Biden today called for justice after the murder of Sonya Massey by a police officer in, where is this, Springfield, Illinois. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, said Sonya Massey, a beloved mother, friend, daughter, and young black woman, should be alive today. Sonya's death at the hands of a responding officer reminds us that all too often black Americans face fears for their safety in ways many of us do not. Sonya's family deserves justice. Now, the police officer has been charged with murder, and he's sitting in jail without bail right now. But what happened was they went into the house. She had called the police at 1 o'clock in the morning. She thought there was a prowler. And so she called 911, and they sent 2 police officers out to her home, 2 Sangamon County Sheriff's deputies. And they walked into the house and were talking to her. And apparently she had some water boiling on the stove, a gas stove. And one of the officers said, would you please, take that pot of water off the stove? We don't want you to have a fire. And so she picked up the pot of water, and then the other officer said, you're not going to throw that water at me, are you? And she's like, no, and he shoots her in the face. He just freaks out and shoots her in the face. It's incredible. Senator Durbin has spoken out. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker has spoken out. The officer, his name is Sean Grayson. He's 30 years old. He's white. He's pleaded not guilty, and is being held in the county jail without bond. He's looking at 45 years for murder, 6 to 30 years for battery, and 2 to 5 years for misconduct. That's a very different story than we first saw with George Floyd, which is, I think, progress. But President Biden also said this Congress must pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act now. This is a law about excessive force in policing. Yeah.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Elon Musk had a huge fail yesterday. I'll tell you about that, and I'll pick up your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Age of Illusions, How America Squandered Its Cold War Victory by Andrew Bacevich. This is from the introduction. Without the Cold War, what's the point of being an American? Henry Rabbit Angstrom, novelist John Updike's late 20th century everyman, posed that question just as the long twilight struggle was winding down. More than a quarter of a century later, Rabbit's plaintive query still awaits a definitive answer. Indeed, the passage of time has only sown confusion about whether there is a point to being an American. Even as the Cold War was ending, Updike's surrogate was not alone in feeling at a loss. By the 1980s, the Cold War had become more than a mere situation or circumstance. It was a state of mind. As had Rabbit, most Americans had come to take its existence for granted. Like the polar ice cap or baseball's status as the national pastime, it had acquired an appearance of permanence. So its passing caught Rabbit's fellow citizens unawares. Those charged with managing the Cold War were, if anything, even more surprised. The enterprise to which they had devoted their professional lives had suddenly vanished. Here was a contingency that the sprawling U.S. national security apparatus, itself a product of the anti-communist crusade, had failed to anticipate. At one level, of course, the surprise could not have been more gratifying. In the epic competition against pitting West against East, the God-fearing against the godless, and democracy against totalitarianism, our side had won. All-out nuclear war had been averted. The cause of freedom, which Americans felt certain they themselves embodied, had prevailed. Victory was decisive, sweeping, and unequivocal. In another sense, however, the passing of the Cold War could not have been more disorienting. In 1987, a senior advisor to Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev had warned, "We are going to do a terrible thing to you. We are going to deprive you of an enemy." As the Soviet Union passed out of existence, Americans were left not just without that enemy, but without even a framework for understanding the world and their place in it. However imperfectly, the Cold War had, for several decades, offered a semblance of order and coherence. The collapse of communism shattered that framework. Where there had been purposefulness and predictability, now there was neither. Winning the Cold War brought Americans face to face with a predicament comparable to that confronting the lucky fellow who wins the Mega Millions lottery. Hidden within an apparent windfall is the potential for monumental disaster. Putting that windfall to good use while avoiding the pitfalls inherent in suddenly acquiring riches calls for prudence and self-awareness. Not easily demonstrated when the big house, luxury car, and vacation condo you've always wanted are yours for the asking. Similarly, the end of the Cold War might have given Americans pause, especially since the issues at hand were of considerably greater significance than homes, cars, and condos. At least in theory, the moment might have invited reflection on some first-order questions. What is the meaning of freedom? What does freedom allow? What obligations does it impose? Whom or what does it exclude? Of course, Americans had been wrestling with such questions since well before 1776, their answers evolving over time. During the several decades of the Cold War, however, the exigencies of the East-West rivalry had offered a reason to throttle down impulses to explore America's furthermost boundaries, or freedom's furthermost boundaries. Except on the fringes of American politics, most citizens accepted the word from Washington that their way of life was under grave threat. In the pecking order of national priorities, addressing that threat, defending freedom rather than enlarging it, tended to take precedence over other considerations. This is not to suggest that Cold War Americans were a complicated lot. They were not. From the 1950s, misleadingly enshrined as a decade of conformity, through the Reagan-dominated 1980s, domestic crises and controversies were constants. Among the issues energizing or enraging Americans were civil liberties, the nuclear arms race, mismanaged wars of dubious provenance, challenges to artistic tradition, left-wing and right-wing radicalism, crass materialism that coexisted with widespread poverty, and a host of simmering issues connected to race, sex, and gender. Yet through it all, an uncommon outlook centered on resistance to the red threat endured. For most citizens, most of the time, the Cold War itself was sufficient to explain the point of being an American. The collapse of the Soviet Empire between 1989 and 1991 robbed that outlook of its last vestiges of authority. Rarely, if ever, had the transition from one historical period to another occurred quite so abruptly, with such a precise set of demarcations, and with such profound implications. As if in an instant, the discipline that the Cold War had imposed vanished. The absurdity of defining reality as an either-or choice, red or dead, slave or free, good versus evil, now became blazingly apparent. The impact on American ambitions and expectations was akin to removing the governor from an internal combustion engine. Suddenly the throttle opened up. The future appeared equally promising, offering Americans a seemingly endless array of choices, while confronting them with few evident constraints. Everything seemed possible. Confident that an era of unprecedented U.S. economic, military, and cultural ascendancy now beckoned, members of an intoxicated elite threw caution to the winds. The book, The Age of Illusion, by Andrew Bacevich.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out.
In the halls of power, where deals are made, where the common voice often fades, there's a silent force, a ghost in the air by an influence. It's just not fair. But money can't speak, it doesn't have a say. We're sure to guide our lives and lead our way. Money can't speak, but it sure can buy a louder voice while the rest of us cry. It's time to rise, time to make a choice. Take back our power, let the people have a voice.
Yeah, too much money in politics. Speaking of which, Elon Musk, on his propaganda platform, which is what X has pretty much become now, a right-wing propaganda platform and home for your favorite Nazis, he posted to a guy named Vinod Khosla. He's a venture capitalist. He was one of the big investors in OpenAI. The company that came up with ChatGPT, the first big AI program. And he had Vinod, the venture capitalist, you guys are both billionaires, right? Vinod had posted a message that the Democratic Party should select a moderate candidate to defeat Trump. And Musk says, come on, Vinod, Trump, Vance, LFG. And whatever LFG stands for, and exclamation mark. And so Vinod replies, again, this is all on X, right? Hard for me to support someone with no values who lies, cheats, rapes, demeans women, hates immigrants like me. He may cut my taxes or reduce some regulation, but that's no reason to accept depravity in his personal values. Do you want a president who will set back climate by a decade in his first year? Do you want his example for your kids as values? Burn. All right, so what's on your mind today? Rich in Central Woolley, Washington. Hey, Rich, what's up?
I think I've got the drop your mic suggestion for a VP candidate.
Okay.
That would be Charlie Crist. Think about it.
The former Republican governor of Florida, now a Democrat, ran for Congress and lost, right?
Mm-hmm. But respected elder statesman, white guy.
Mm-hmm.
You put him together with a candidate of color, plus the draconian Handmaid's Tales policies DeSantis is pushing in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I think we take Florida. Have him around for one term. Make him a one-term VP, and
Did he run for the House or for the Senate? He ran for the Senate, didn't he? After
I think he ran for the Senate against Rubio.
Yeah,
and he came very close.
Yeah, but if he couldn't carry the whole state of Florida running for the Senate, what makes you think he would help as VP?
There's a little more gravitas with being a VP than say running for Senate.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of people there that are sick of DeSantis and his draconian policies, and would like to see some swing in the federal government to come and bring out a national abortion law.
I've been saying for a long time, even before Joe Biden stepped down, for a long time, I've been saying that I'm very optimistic about this fall, and I continue to be. I think Americans reject extremism. I don't think that most Americans want a rapist and a con man and a tax fraud guy as president of the United States. I just, who says he wants to be a dictator on day one and that he wants to suspend the Constitution and declare a state of emergency on the first day. I don't think that most Americans want, the police going door to door, taking anybody who looks Hispanic and can't find their birth documents off to concentration camps. I just don't think that's what Americans want. So we'll see.
No,
Rich?
I don't think so either. I think Charlie Crist also kind of brings along more of the macho white guy.
Well, I see him on MSNBC from time to time. I don't know a lot about him. He has been on this program more than once, but it's been a long time since he was on. So, Rich, thanks for the call. Jonathan in Chicago. Hey, Jonathan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I wanted to call in and thank you for the insightful rebuttal to my question yesterday. I love this platform. It allows for those conversations to be had. But I was calling in to just point out two things that are being brought up in conversations. I hear some of my voting friends talk about, Kamala didn't earn this spot or we didn't vote for her. And I push back so hard on that, saying, listen, we voted for Biden-Harris in 2020. We voted for Biden-Harris this entire primary season. And Republicans only voted for Trump. They didn't vote for J.D. Vance. And the RNC literally is run by Trump. So when you want to talk about someone who's installed, that's what you should be looking at.
There you go. Okay, great point, Jonathan. Thank you very much. That was a good one. Steve in Seattle. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? You are the smartest person on the radio.
Well, maybe not, but thanks for the kind words. What's on your mind?
Well, I have a vice president pick for you I think no one has thought of. Mallory McMurrow, Michigan State Representative Mallory McMurrow.
Oh, the redheaded young woman who really took it to Trump a couple of years ago. I haven't heard a lot about her lately.
I know. That's why we should get her on there. She is something else.
Yeah. My guess is she's she's just a state rep, right? She's not a state, or is she a state senator?
I think she's a state senator, but it doesn't matter because the word. Yeah,
Sean says she's a senator, so yeah.
The feeling and the emotions come out in her speech every time she's talked.
Yeah.
She's passionate about everything.
Oh, she's brilliant.
Something else.
She is brilliant. Like I said, she's been on this program. She's really good. She's really smart. She knows what she's talking about, and she speaks truth to power like nobody's business.
And she would wrap up a lot of the young vote too.
That's true. I don't know how old she is. My guess would be in her 40s. But she comes across as a very young woman, or a very young person.
She's something else.
Yeah, she really is. Steve, thank you. Thanks for that. Tim in Aloha, Oregon. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, all this confusion about the lack of security for Trump. I mean, the answer is very simple. The least least likely person that the Secret Service would think that would come after Trump that wouldn't happen. You see what I mean? They encourage that kind of mentality in the weaponry, so they're not going to think that somebody's going to come after Trump. That guy's going to be in the crowd cheering for him.
The guy with the AR-15.
What people are going to do. Yeah, what they're going to be doing is they're going to go after Hispanic schools and black neighborhoods and, Planned Parenthood physicians and stuff like that. What other trouble did he have in the last almost 4 years?
I think this was just a complete disaster, the security at that thing. And I think it's a good thing that the director of the Secret Service stepped down today. I think she should have. It was a failure of epic proportions. And her answers to Congress yesterday were terrible.
Were horrible. Oh, yeah.
I mean, even to Democrats who were trying to be nice to her. I mean, Jim Jordan made an ass of himself. He always does. He's so shouty,
what else is new?
Yeah. But what's his name? James Comer, the chairman of the committee, wasn't much better. But even Jamie I think it was Raskin. Maybe I'm thinking of somebody else. But anyhow, one of the Democrats just some very Krishnamurthy was asking him some asking her some very thoughtful, very solid questions about what happened, about security, and her answers were arrogant.
Right.
Like, we're the police. We don't need to talk to you.
The point is when you have somebody that encourages somebody like that shooter to exist, both with the weaponry and the mentality, they're going to figure he's the least likely guy that's going to be attacked.
No, that's a good point. And there are people who are arguing that kind of Trump brought it on himself, because he's been such an advocate for guns and violence. I don't buy that. I don't think that we should go down that road. I don't think anybody brings assassination attempts on themselves, but I do think that Trump has raised the level of political violence in this country, and that's
there's absolutely no question about that.
It's not a good or healthy thing.
That's one of their bases for their whole campaign.
Yep.
You see what I mean?
I'm with you. Tim, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's up?
Thomas, just a quick call, a couple of little points here. Quick goes.
just to let you know, and you might remember a couple of calls I had with you, I was very discouraged about Biden and wanting a change. Well, we got it, and we got it big time now. So I am...
You just went silent, Nicholas.
This debate months before. I am on board. Just gave $150. $100 million raised in the first 36 hours?
Yeah.
Question mark.
Yeah, I sent $100 to him last night.
Does anybody fail to understand what that indicates and how much pent-up positive energy there has been sitting out there?
And 38,000 volunteers. I mean, Rachel Maddow pointed out last night they've been averaging a dozen volunteers a day, and they got 38,000 in 24 hours.
The previous week on a day. Yeah. And two things, real quick one. David Plouffe is coming on board for her again. Now, it has not been made official.
He's good.
But I know David Plouffe, or knew him years ago. His sister was a very good friend of mine. He, David, and she and I had long suppers at her house. She'd die. Phenomenal. One-story old log house she and her husband had bought for $20,000, fully furnished down to the knife sharpeners, the oriental rugs, the old, unbelievable, in front of a blazing fire. And we sat and talked about one thing. And so David Plouffe, if you're out there, it's Nicholas from Lubeck and your sister's friend. You remember what we talked about, the power of taunting your adversary, of outright taunting them. This is the one thing Trump cannot stand. His narcissistic traits do not allow for him to be taunted in public or made fun of. She needs to come out with an ad, and it needs, David, if you're listening, or your aides are listening, it needs to be in a little girl voice. Come out, Johnny. Don't be afraid of me. Right. Debate me, Johnny.
Right.
Come out wherever you are.
I think her statement that she prosecuted, rapists and con men, and she knows who Donald Trump is, that has to be terrifying him. Nicholas, thanks for the call. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Right back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. By the way, Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, and Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, both just came out and endorsed Vice President Harris. So there you go. It's rolling along. She's unstoppable at this point. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind today?
To be sending their kids to the same schools that the Middle East do to the madras, where they learn the proper way to treat women and people that aren't rich. And I'm just wondering, do they have those kind of schools here in the United States too? Because it seems like it. And
it's called the Christian school movement. It's and then of course there's cults like the one that Amy Coney Barrett grew up in. It was a Catholic cult, and she was called a handmaiden.
Yeah. Do they have Republicans that are going to be hired to stand on street corners with little whips, and they can beat any women that happen to be walking around without a man? And
I'm sure the idea has occurred to them.
Oh, I'm sure it has too. I just hope that Harris picks a vice presidential candidate that is an educated person.
Yeah.
And not because of, he used to be an astronaut, or, he used to be a Republican, or, he used to this. I want someone that's intelligent in his own right.
Yep.
And forward-thinking enough that he can be a true partner to her, and they can get some things done.
I completely agree, Sandra. And it's looking to me, and again, I have no crystal ball here. I don't know anybody in the Harris campaign. But it's looking to me like Josh Shapiro is kind of rising to the top of the list. Although, as I said, and as Congressman was it Congressman Connie yesterday? Yeah, he said that Mark Kelly looks like he's also in the race.
I hope not.
I'm not as fond of Mark Kelly, but like I said earlier with Lyndon Johnson and JFK, you just never know. I mean, sometimes people will really surprise you.
I want someone who actually looks to the future.
I do too. Sandra,
not Mark Kelly.
Sandra, got to move along. Thanks for the call. Anita in Denver. Hey, Anita, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Hey, I have a suggestion. How about Stacey Abrams?
Somebody suggested her yesterday. I doubt that she'll be the pick, but I think that she would be a great candidate.
I think so too. I think she would help us take Georgia.
Yeah, she could. She got badly taken advantage of, or burned, or ripped off, or screwed, or whatever the right word is, by Brian Kemp, the current governor of Georgia, when he was the Secretary of State and running against her. And he purged, and he had control of the voting rolls. He purged out over 100,000 people off the voting rolls and then won by a 50,000 vote margin. Surprise, surprise, right?
I think Stacey may have had it if Brian Kemp hadn't played ugly.
Yeah. No, she should have been governor. I mean, this was just per our conversation with David Pepper just a minute ago, this was just a great example of how Republicans hang on to power by messing with the voting rolls. And it's their new game, right? And they're doing it all over the country. Every red state, they're purging the voting rolls in every blue city in every red state. And they've been doing it for a couple of decades. Anita got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced. I'll be right back with you. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So the Supreme Court is or at least the Republicans on the Supreme Court are completely out of control. I wrote an op-ed about this over at HartmannReport.com titled "From Oaths to Lies, the GOP's Supreme Court Coup." And they gave king-like powers to the president to break the law and have immunity from prosecution as long as he calls it an official act. I mean, that's literally rewriting Article 2 of the Constitution from 1789. They signed the death warrant for agencies that protect our air, water, food, drugs, and workplace. That dates back to 1887 when the Interstate Commerce Commission was created. They gutted the 14th Amendment's requirement put into place in 1868 that no person who's engaged in an insurrection or rebellion can hold public office. They rewrote the National Firearms Act of 1934 to allow AR-15s with a bump stock to become fully automatic weapons. It's nuts. It goes on from there. You can read the whole piece at HartmannReport.com. But Congress really needs to hold this Supreme Court to account. Check it out.
In the distance, the sky turns dark. A storm is brewing, ready to embark. Muddy's the wind, twisting and turning. A tornado is coming, leaving its mark. A tornado is coming, money's the name. Sweeping through politics, it's a dangerous game. Voices of the people drown in the roar. As the cyclone of cash knocks down every door. Promises made.
Welcome back. 53 minutes past the hour. Jerry in Kissimmee, Florida. Hey, Jerry, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to mention to you, you talked about Charlie Crist. Charlie Crist ran for governor here in Florida, but took a trouncing by DeSantis.
Yeah, and he was your governor, too, at one point.
Yes, and he had switched parties.
Yeah.
Right. Also, last night I was on the call with black men for Kamala Harris. It was over 2,000 people on this Zoom call with Roland Martin and several others, and Westmore got on the call, Reverend Barber, Bakari Sellers. It was really fantastic. Everybody's really fired up. Yeah, and in small donations, we raised like $1.3 million last night, and people are organizing to go into the community, to go to barbershops and talk to guys in barbershops, to get rid of all of these lies about Kamala Harris, to go to blue-collar workers, black men in the communities, and talk to them. So they have groups that are organizing to do specific things. And I think it's really fantastic. And I myself feel more motivated than I did, of course, though I supported Biden. But, you know, I feel re-energized. And I think on that call last night, I mean, husbands and fathers of young daughters, they're concerned about what's going to happen, and they're very motivated. So I just wanted to let the audience know that.
Well, thank you for the report, Jerry. That's great. And for the update on Charlie Crist. I appreciate it. Thank you. Mike in Phoenix. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I just wanted, I figured I'm allowed to dream here. So if I am the people who are in charge of Kamala Harris, I am going out today and saying, we have a debate scheduled on ABC. I would be thrilled to have a second debate on Fox News. And in fact, I'll give you another choice. I'll have a third debate. You pick the questioner who questions me, and I'll pick a questioner who questions you. And that's how you dare him into getting on the stage with her as much as possible, since we only have 100 days.
Yeah.
And my vice presidential choice is Roy Cooper of North Carolina. I think he's a perfect fit.
Now, I know very little about Roy Cooper. Tell me why.
I just think that the demographic. I want another attorney general.
He's a former AG.
The demographic. Yeah, I believe so. And I think that the demographic that he brings balances.
Which is what, a white guy from the South?
A white guy from the South. A moderate white guy from the South who appeals to conservatives.
Now, give me some policies of Roy Cooper's that would illuminate those labels.
I cannot. I can only do this by statistics.
Yeah,
by my feel.
That's the problem.
I'm in Arizona. I just don't think Mark Kelly is an answer.
Yeah.
I love Josh Shapiro. As a Jew, I'm afraid that adding a Jew to the ticket would make it even more problematic. And the best option I see out there is Roy Cooper.
I think the only people that a Jew on the ticket is going to piss off are the people who are already asses. I mean, they're already bent out of shape because Kamala Harris is, half black, half Indian. The racists and anti-Semites are pretty much the same people, and so you've already got that.
I wish I felt that way. I think it's a different animal.
Yeah.
My own personal belief.
Yeah.
And I love Josh Shapiro.
So do I. I think the key would be Josh Shapiro's position on Netanyahu, which I understand is less embracing than Biden's, but I don't really know. And I need to, I've been looking around for that. I haven't seen anything clear on it. But in any case, Mike, thank you for the call. Thank you very much. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Joe Conason is going to drop by for a half hour, and we're going to talk about his new book, Grifters, Swindlers, and Frauds, Hijacking American Conservatism.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
We say fight back!
today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Age of Illusions, How America Squandered Its Cold War Victory by Andrew Bacevich. This is from the introduction. Without the Cold War, what's the point of being an American? Henry Rabbit Angstrom, novelist John Updike's late 20th century everyman, posed that question just as the long twilight struggle was winding down. More than a quarter of a century later, Rabbit's plaintive query still awaits a definitive answer. Indeed, the passage of time has only sown confusion about whether there is a point to being an American. Even as the Cold War was ending, Updike's surrogate was not alone in feeling it a loss. By the 1980s, the Cold War had become more than a mere situation or circumstance. It was a state of mind. As had Rabbit, most Americans had come to take its existence for granted. Like the polar ice cap or baseball's status as the national pastime, it had acquired an appearance of permanence, so its passing caught Rabbit's fellow citizens unawares. Those charged with managing the Cold War were, if anything, even more surprised. The enterprise to which they had devoted their professional lives had suddenly vanished. Here was a contingency that the sprawling U.S. national security apparatus, itself a product of the anti-communist crusade, had failed to anticipate. At one level, of course, the surprise could not have been more gratifying. In the epic competition against pitting West against East, the God-fearing against the godless, and democracy against totalitarianism, our side had won. All-out nuclear war had been averted. The cause of freedom, which Americans felt certain they themselves embodied, had prevailed. Victory was decisive, sweeping, and unequivocal. In another sense, however, the passing of the Cold War could not have been more disorienting. In 1987, a senior advisor to Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev had warned, "We are going to do a terrible thing to you. We are going to deprive you of an enemy." As the Soviet Union passed out of existence, Americans were left not just without that enemy, but without even a framework for understanding the world and their place in it. However imperfectly, the Cold War had, for several decades, offered a semblance of order and coherence. The collapse of communism shattered that framework. Where there had been purposefulness and predictability, now there was neither. Winning the Cold War brought Americans face to face with a predicament comparable to that confronting the lucky fellow who wins the Mega Millions lottery. Hidden within an apparent windfall is the potential for monumental disaster. Putting that windfall to good use while avoiding the pitfalls inherent in suddenly acquiring riches calls for prudence and self-awareness. Not easily demonstrated when the big house, luxury car, and vacation condo you've always wanted are yours for the asking. Similarly, the end of the Cold War might have given Americans pause, especially since the issues at hand were of considerably greater significance than homes, cars, and condos. At least in theory, the moment might have invited reflection on some first-order questions. What is the meaning of freedom? What does freedom allow? What obligations does it impose? Whom or what does it exclude? Of course, Americans had been wrestling with such questions since well before 1776, their answers evolving over time. During the several decades of the Cold War, however, the exigencies of the East-West rivalry had offered a reason to throttle down impulses to explore America's furthermost boundaries, or freedom's furthermost boundaries. Except on the fringes of American politics, most citizens accepted the word from Washington that their way of life was under grave threat. In the pecking order of national priorities, addressing that threat, defending freedom rather than enlarging it, tended to take precedence over other considerations. This is not to suggest that Cold War Americans were a complicated lot. They were not. From the 1950s, misleadingly enshrined as a decade of conformity, through the Reagan-dominated 1980s, domestic crises and controversies were constants. Among the issues energizing or enraging Americans were civil liberties, the nuclear arms race, mismanaged wars of dubious provenance, challenges to artistic tradition, left-wing and right-wing radicalism, crass materialism that coexisted with widespread poverty, and a host of simmering issues connected to race, sex, and gender. Yet through it all, an uncommon outlook centered on resistance to the red threat endured. For most citizens, most of the time, the Cold War itself was sufficient to explain the point of being an American. The collapse of the Soviet Empire between 1989 and 1991 robbed that outlook of its last vestiges of authority. Rarely, if ever, had the transition from one historical period to another occurred quite so abruptly, with such a precise set of demarcations, and with such profound implications. As if in an instant, the discipline that the Cold War had imposed vanished. The absurdity of defining reality as an either-or choice, red or dead, slave or free, good versus evil, now became blazingly apparent. The impact on American ambitions and expectations was akin to removing the governor from an internal combustion engine. Suddenly, the throttle opened up. The future appeared equally promising, offering Americans a seemingly endless array of choices, while confronting them with few evident constraints. Everything seemed possible. Confident that an era of unprecedented U.S. economic, military, and cultural ascendancy now beckoned, members of an intoxicated elite threw caution to the winds. The book, The Age of Illusion, by Andrew Bacevich.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is the founder and editor-in-chief of the National Memo, editor-at-large of Type Investigations, a nonprofit organization investigative reporting organization formerly known as the Investigative Fund, author of the brilliant new book with input from George Conway, The Longest Con, How Grifters, Swindlers, and Frauds Hijacked American Conservatism. Joe Conason. Joe, welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us. What provoked you to write this book?
Tom, it's great to be back with you again after a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Let me say that the story of how I came to write this book is told in the introduction, which I've posted on nationalmemo.com so people can have a free look and see whether they think the book might be for them. This book came about because my wife, Elizabeth Wagley, read an article in The Baffler from 2012 by the historian Rick Perlstein, who I'm sure you know. Mm-hmm. And Rick had written a very amusing piece for The Baffler about the Mitt Romney campaign and the sort of mendacities and misleading propaganda in that campaign against Barack Obama's reelection. But then the piece that Rick wrote kind of digressed into the fact that he had, in working on this story, he had subscribed to a number of conservative websites and publications and found himself inundated in his email with every kind of solicitation for a con or a scam that you could imagine. Overpriced gold, fake cancer is inextricable from the rest of what passes for conservatism at this point. The scam is this at the center of right-wing ideology, right-wing propaganda, the whole right-wing business is now thoroughly intertwined with this. And to me, when I read this, I was like, yes, this is a good idea. And moreover, it seemed to me to encapsulate how Donald Trump had come to be the boss of the right. He so embodies the scam mentality and the urge to swindle people and these kind of skills of the con man that I knew if I went into this and wrote this book, it would explain a lot about how we got to where we are.
Well, this, and we'll start with the history in just a second, but this does go back a long way. I mean, I believe it was John Maynard Keynes who said that conservatism is engaged in one of the oldest frauds, I'm paraphrasing here, which is the search for a moral justification for selfishness.
Exactly.
So, here we are.
It's worse than selfishness. I mean, selfishness is bad enough in many forms, but this is actually, ripping people off.
Yeah,
I mean,
this goes beyond greed. This is
brazenly. Yes, brazenly. It's not just defending what's yours against any claim, but but going much further than that and taking what belongs to other people under false pretenses. And that is really at the core of what is happening now.
Well, it's a brilliant book. We're talking with Joe Conason, his new book, The Longest Con, How Grifters, Swindlers, and Frauds Hijacked American Conservatism. And you start the book with the era of Joe McCarthy and Roy Cohn. Lay the field for us.
Well, Tom, as I'm sure you will understand, that was a bit of a conceit. Once I realized I was going to write this book and I started to put it together in my mind, it occurred to me that since I knew we were going to conclude with chapters about Trump and Trumpism and the people surrounding Trump, that one might start with Roy Cohn, his mentor, the lawyer whose name he cried out in the White House when he felt that he was in battle. Where is my Roy Cohn? But not just because of Trump. The fact, as I looked closely at Roy, who I covered back in the days when I was at the Village Voice, because he was actually kind of a crypto presence in New York politics back then when I was a young reporter, the more I realized that the acceptance of Roy Cohn, someone like him, who had absolutely no morality, a self-serving, crook, didn't pay his taxes, didn't pay people who worked for him, lied his way through court cases, ripped off his own clients to the point where he was eventually disbarred at the end of his life, that someone like that, the acceptance of him by the most prominent figures on the right, Ronald Reagan, William Safire of the New York Times, William Buckley, they all counted Roy as their friend, and they lionized him, they lifted him up, they celebrated him. And to me, that symbolized the beginning of a real moral degeneration in conservatism, which was, after all, supposed to be an ideology, a philosophy, you could even say, of civic virtue, of moral hygiene, of moral authority. And you can't have it both ways. You can't be the movement that says, oh, we love Roy Cohn and Roy Cohn is wonderful, and we all kind of rely on Roy Cohn to help us, despite his manifest moral flaws, and also claim to be, the philosophy of virtue. So,
what did the William F. Buckleys of the day think of the Roy Cohns and Richard Nixons of the day?
Well, Bill Buckley had the good sense to be embarrassed by them. He attacked you, as I know you know, Tom, because
I used to read his stuff all the time in the late 50s and 60s.
I've read so much of your work about this stuff, and I know you know it inside and out. Bill Buckley had the sense to be embarrassed by the excesses. But in fact, he publicly celebrated Roy Cohn. They had a big dinner for Roy, with a black tie event. Bill Buckley was kind of the master of ceremonies. I mean, it goes on and on. And Safire, the late columnist for the New York Times, who did so much harm, same thing. He was, Roy helps me, I help him. He was interviewed at the time. There was a symbiotic relationship, and Roy was, in the shadows, extremely powerful and influential.
Was the moving from Roy Cohn into the kind of the Nixon era here, or maybe even the Goldwater era, was the deal struck basically of the GOP like, well, we realize, William F. Buckley saying, the modern conservative stands athwart the arc of history with his hand out shouting stop and all this kind of stuff. That's all well and good, but people are not enthusiastic about that. So we'll go along with the grifters and the con artists and later the religious grifters, the Jerry Falwells, in order to get the votes so that we can do what we think is noble, which is, serving the interests of the ruling class that we think without a ruling class society will eventually fall apart, which I would argue was basically Bill Buckley's worldview. Or was, as in purely symbiotic relationship, or was it something different? How did these grifters end up in control of the Republican Party, essentially? We got a minute or two here before we're going to have to hit a quick break. So,
well, I would say, Tom, that the way they end up in this position is begins with the rise of a man named Richard Viguerie, who figured out how to basically vacuum in money from the grassroots.
Yeah, he was the mail order guy.
He was the direct mail guy who managed to monetize the Goldwater campaign, or the aftermath of the Goldwater campaign, into an enormous list that they had never had of millions of people who were willing to give money for these causes. And of course, the ability, as Viguerie discovered, to just get people to send you money by asking them for it quickly became, a scenario for enormous grifting.
Yeah, which
that's the thumbnail explanation.
Yeah, no, I get it, and that leads us to people like Paul Weyrich and a whole bunch of them. We'll continue the conversation in just a second. We're talking with Joe Conason, the founder and editor-in-chief of National Memo. His new book, The Longest Con: How Grifters, Swindlers, and Frauds Hijacked American Conservatism. A brilliant piece of work. We'll be right back with Joe Conason. Stay with us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The book, once again, The Longest Con. Stay tuned. And welcome back. So, Joe, as much as I am fascinated by that era of my youth, I mean, literally, the 50s, 60s, 70s, what I find fascinating is the rise of Ronald Reagan in the 1980s and his ability to convince Americans that the horse and sparrow theory that Harding had used in 1920 and that McKinley had used in 1898, as I recall, or 1896. That if you feed the horses extra oats, the extra oats will pass through. They can't digest them, and so the sparrows will have more oats to pick out of the horse patties, in the streets. I mean, this all went back to the days when everybody had, towns had horses.
They wouldn't describe it that way, but yes, that's exactly.
No, that's literally how they described it. It was called the horse and sparrow theory, and they actually.
I'm saying, but not Reagan.
No, Reagan didn't describe it. No, he reinvented it as a trickle-down thery. We would pour a whole bunch of wine into the top glass, and it'll spill into all the other little glasses, and et cetera. So it just amazed me how people just fell for that. What was at the core of the Reagan campaign in 1980, in your opinion? I mean, outside of Jimmy Carter being beat up because Reagan cut the deal with the Iranians to hold the hostages, what was the essence of his grift that got him into the White House?
Well, Reagan was a charming figure. He was a sunny, Morning in America candidate who stood in contrast to the somewhat gloomy Jimmy Carter at that point. So it's one thing. And big promises, what you were alluding to is supply side economics, that, if we only cut taxes for the wealthy, then the entire economy would boom. And we would also have to cut, benefits to people, but that was kind of a footnote. And it was an enormous lie. I mean, I discussed this in the book in passages about a man named David Stockman, who was the head of the Office of Management and Budget, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, he's been on this program.
Under Reagan, a congressman from Michigan, who eventually unburdened himself of the truth to a great reporter named William Greider, who wrote about it for the Atlantic magazine, which was essentially that what had happened when Reagan's landmark legislation passed on budget and taxes was that the hogs were feeding at the trough. Lobbyists for the wealthy and corporations came and took everything, and the upshot was there was to be nothing left for the middle class and poor, to the point where they reclassified, as I know you recall, ketchup became a vegetable in school lunches because they just weren't going to spend anything on anybody except themselves. That was the essence of it. And along with that came a huge gang of grifters and crooks, some of whom are still with us today, like Roger Stone, like Paul Manafort, who was there at the time. And the Reagan administration was the biggest crime wave in government in our history up until the advent of Trump. This is, statistically proven. I go through all of the data in my book.
There you go.
Just to show, what had happened as a consequence of unprincipled people taking control of the conservative movement when Reagan rose to power.
There you go. The book is The Longest Con, How Grifters, Swindlers, and Frauds Hijacked American Conservatism. We'll be right back with Joe Conason in about 15 seconds. Stay with us. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them.
Turn the dial, tune in, and you'll find a voice of reason for the open mind. On Lefty Talk Radio, we speak the truth about the American dream for me and you.
And welcome back. We're talking to Joe Conason, the author of his newest book, The Longest Con, How Grifters, Swindlers, and Frauds Hijacked American Conservatism. Joe, we were just talking about how the Reagan administration was basically the biggest political crime wave that America had, arguably in its entire history. And although I think Andrew Jackson probably, but anyway,
but it was Teapot Dome as well. I mean, you're the historian here.
Yeah. Well, Teapot Dome was that was tiny stuff. I mean, Albert Fell was the Secretary of the Interior or the Secretary of the Navy, I think. And well, we don't need to get into that. But anyway,
it was notorious. But yes, it was a big crime wave under Ronald Reagan, who, by the way, didn't take any of it for himself, as far as I could tell, or at least nothing significant. But he was surrounded with crooks, starting with Attorney General Ed Meese.
Yeah, and then we got George Herbert Walker Bush and his son George W. Bush, and I think the common thought in America is, Trump may be a grifter and Reagan might have been a hustler, but those guys were noble people. They were part of American nobility that stretches back through, Prescott Bush and Brown Brothers Harriman and blah-de-blah-de-blah. Tell us about their administrations.
Well, George Herbert Walker Bush. Again, these Republican administrations attract a certain class of con man and criminal around them. In fact, so George W. Bush was really in many ways the precursor to Trump. I wrote a previous book about W called It Can't Happen Here, which was about the fact that, and I believe I was on this show to talk about it back when
I have the book.
But that book sort of presaged the rise of an authoritarian element in the Republican Party, accompanied by, pseudo-religion. And in fact, when people talk now about how, Trump is being deified by the Republican Party, and they say that he's, chosen by God and so on and so forth, those same blasphemous themes were sounded when W was president. I'm sure you'll probably remember that. It was stunning, the claims that were made on his behalf and that he made about how it was providential that he had been raised up by the Lord to deal with Iraq, which didn't work out that well. And so now they all pretend that never happened, but it did. And some of the same figures, same swindlers on the evangelical right, who were with him are still around with Trump. Rod Parsley, who's a preacher in Ohio, who has a mega church and preaches what is called the prosperity gospel that I discuss at some length in this book because they really are around Trump. Trump very much resembles a prosperity gospel preacher. And what they claim is the absolute authority of the minister who is anointed as a prophet by God and who can demand almost anything from the parishioners, especially their money, with the promise in exchange that they will receive wealth and good health and anything they want. And it's just the most arrant ridiculous religious scam, but there are millions of people who give money to these people, Tom, and they in turn love Trump. They gathered around Trump in 2015, anointed him in Trump Tower as their candidate, and
grifters new grifters, it seems.
Grifters,
Joe, we just have a minute left here. What is the biggest takeaway that you want people to know about, from this book, and what's the biggest learning that you had that you wanted to share with people?
You know what's important in this book, Tom? I mean, there are a number of things that I want people to get from it, but what I wish could happen is that people who read this book would share it with their conservative friends. The reason being that it would be great for the conservatives, true conservatives, I guess you could say, to realize that their movement is being ripped off by these people. It's why in this book I mostly quote conservatives about this, many of them who are upset about it, including some very hardline people like Eric Erickson of Red State and Jim Garrity of the National Review. And, it's why I asked George Conway, who is a real honest conservative, to write the foreword to my book. He happens to be my friend, but although we were once at swords crossed back in the day, but now he's part of the Popular Front Against Fascism. And, he too would like to see a conservatism that was stripped of these crooks and grifters and scammers.
I think it would only benefit our country, frankly. We do need both sides, or two sides.
That's absolutely my point.
Joe Conason, the brilliant Joe Conason. The book is The Longest Con: How Grifters, Swindlers, and Frauds Hijacked American Conservatism. Available wherever you find fine books. Joe, thanks so much for dropping by.
So grateful to you, Tom. Thank you.
Very nice. Very wonderful having you with us. Thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And I'll be back with your calls right after this. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Stay tuned. Progressive Plan to Pull America Back from the Brink by Thom Hartmann. And this is from Chapter 2, The Economy. The epigraph, Woody Guthrie's saying, some men rob you with a six-gun, others rob you with a fountain pen. The title, the opening part of this chapter, The Coup of the Elites. The election of 1992 pitted Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. While Bush was running as a conservative who was compassionate enough to hope for 1,000 points of privatized non-governmental light, Clinton campaigned as an unabashed FDR, believing in government as a solution liberal. In language reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Square Deal and FDR's Progressive New Deal, Clinton proposed a new covenant between the U.S. government and U.S. citizens. In a speech at Georgetown University on October 23, 1991, he declared, "We've got to rebuild our political life before the demagogues and the racists and those who pander to the worst in us bring this country down. People once looked at the president and the Congress to bring us together, to solve problems, to make progress. Now, in the face of massive challenges, our government stands discredited, our people are disillusioned. There's a hole in our politics where our sense of common purpose used to be. To turn America around, we've got to have a new approach, founded on our most sacred principles as a nation, with a vision for the future. We need a new covenant, a solemn agreement between the people and their government to provide opportunity for everybody, inspire responsibility throughout our society, and restore a sense of community to our great nation. A new covenant to take government back from the powerful interests in the bureaucracy and give it back to the ordinary people of our country. More than 200 years ago, our founding fathers outlined our first social compact between government and the people, not just between lords and kings. More than 100 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave his life to maintain the union that compact created. More than 60 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt renewed that promise with a New Deal that offered opportunity in return for hard work. Today, we need to forge a new covenant that will repair the damaged bond between the people and their government, restore our basic values, embed the idea that a country has the responsibility to help people get ahead, but that the citizens have not only the right, but the responsibility to rise as far and fast as their talents and determination can take them. And most important of all, that we're all in this together. We have to make good on the words of Thomas Jefferson, who once said, "A debt of service is due from every man to his country, proportional to the bounties which nature and fortune have measured to him." End of quote from Bill Clinton.
Americans loved it. A majority of voters in 1992 were old enough to remember what America was like under the 1940 to 1981 New Deal era, when a single worker with a good job had health care, a pension, and could raise a family and buy a home. When the GI Bill educated millions, when hospitals and health insurance companies in nearly every state were required by law to be not-for-profit corporations, and health care was inexpensive and widely available. And they noticed that the 12 years of Reagan and Bush had begun the process of shattering that historic era, that the middle class was slipping away, the government had become remote and hostile rather than protecting the rights of workers and the middle class. Americans elected Clinton based on his FDR-style rhetoric. They were looking forward to a return to the golden age of America's middle class. They were ready for the new covenant, and apparently so was Bill Clinton. There is every sign that he actually believed his own rhetoric. On all this, he won the election in November and spent that month and December preparing his new covenant programs to restore the American middle class. Until January. As Adam Curtis brilliantly points out in a special documentary series he did for the BBC titled The Trap, a few weeks before Bill Clinton was to be sworn into office as President of the United States, he was visited by Goldman Sachs CEO Robert Rubin, who had just taken a $40 million paycheck for his last year with Goldman and would soon become the head of Clinton's economic team tasked with carrying out the new covenant, and with Alan Greenspan. Rubin and Greenspan sat the young new president down and told him the facts of life as they saw them. Clinton would not govern as an FDR liberal. Instead, he must cut government, promote free trade, and reduce regulation of business. Clinton complied and has been richly rewarded. In his second inaugural address, he declared the era of big government is over. The philosophy represented by Rubin and Greenspan doesn't believe in government as a solution to much of anything other than wars and crime. As true classical conservatives in the mold of Sir Edmund Burke and Thomas Hobbes, many modern libertarians and neoliberals don't even believe in democracy. As any libertarian will honestly admit, they call it the tyranny of the majority, or mob rule. Instead, because they believe in the inherently evil nature of most humans, they held that a small ruling elite of good people, the wise ones, must concentrate wealth and power, the first fuels the second by and large, in a small number of hands, out of the reach of what the first American conservative President John Adams called the rabble, us. They believed that social stability was more important than social mobility. As of this writing, the surest way to become wealthy in the United States or Britain is to be born to wealthy parents. The surest way to be poor is to be born to poor parents. Social mobility, the ability to move between classes for better or worse, has been rolled back from its highly fluid levels in the 1940 to 1980 years to a rigidity last measured in the 1920s as America was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. Conservatives, since Sir Edmund Burke's opposition to the Revolutionary War of 1776 to today's opponents of labor rights, believe that too much power and wealth in the hands of the middle class will inevitably lead to instability. The book, Threshold, The Progressive Plan to Take America Back from the Brink.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com.
In the land of the free, a shadow fell. A storm was brewing, could you tell? A man with power, a voice so loud, riled up the fear, drew in a crowd. He spoke of greatness, a wall so high, but underneath, the hate did lie. From screens and rallies, the fire spread, a virus of hate so many misled. The Trump hate virus, spreading wide. Innocence lost, love pushed aside. In the hearts of many, darkness grows.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Yeah, the Trump hate virus. Picking up your calls here. Bruce in the Dominican Republic. Hey, Bruce, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. How you doing? Long time listener, first time caller.
Well, thank you, Bruce. What's up?
Yeah. I did have listen to Joe Conason. Let me quickly say
that
that's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Roy Cohn.
Yeah.
You know, But it also reminds me that the movie that The Apprentice, which was released in in Cannes recently and tremendous reviews. Of course, no American studio will distributor will pick it up.
At least so far.
And it's still very hard to access. I don't know if you're aware of that one.
I am.
But the reason I called was I've always been fascinated going back to the early 2000s when we did Air America, and I started getting into talk radio myself, listening to different shows to figure out what was going on. The whole thing with it started, of course, on right-wing talk radio with calling the Democratic Party the Democrat Party.
That actually started in the 1950s. That was a Joe McCarthyism. Joe McCarthy said the Democrat.
Oh, really?
I'm paraphrasing. But he said Democratic Party sounds too nice. So call it the Democrat Party with emphasis on the rat. That was his verbatim quote.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I knew there was a historical, but it was reintroduced, by Rush Limbaugh.
Oh, sure.
And he used it all the time. And then other people caught on to the point where literally every Republican now uses that expression.
Yep.
And and what have we done? We said, what are they doing? That's so rude. Why are they renaming our party? But they succeeded in doing it. It just happened. And you think of some of the things going on today. It's going to be the same thing with Kamala Harris.
Oh, they're gonna try to Willie Horton her. I just don't think it's going to work this time, Bruce. Right
now they're calling her Camilla.
I know. They'll distort her name. They'll darken her picture. They're going to do all this stuff. But I really think that we've been through this in a couple of election cycles, and you've got a changing electorate, and people are wise to it. I mean, it's still going to play in rural Indiana or something like that. But anyhow, Bruce, I got to move along. But thank you for the call. Yeah. Thank you for your kind words. Speaking of Indiana, Mark in Celestine, Indiana. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Tom, you just made me laugh so thoroughly because I live in deep southern Indiana.
Okay.
I just wanted to deep southern Indiana. I'm like a county from the Kentucky state line. And just wanted your opinion with Andy Beshear. Yeah. He seems like he's more of a moderate. Do you think he's a serious presidential candidate for Kamala? And my other part of my question was, why would they vet Roy Cooper? Does Roy Cooper help secure North Carolina? Does he help secure Virginia? Does he bring Georgia back in play? And I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. My understanding is that's the theory. I mean, I don't know that much about Roy Cooper's politics or Andy Beshear's for that matter. I just got a newsletter during the break. I haven't read the whole thing about Andy Beshear, one of the Substack newsletters that I subscribe to, but. I'm still thinking probably Josh Shapiro is right up there. I know people are talking about Mark Kelly. I don't think he's a progressive. It's all speculation right now. But Mark, I can't give you any great insights into those guys, into Cooper or Beshear, because I just haven't done my homework on them. My apologies. But Mark, thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you. Terry in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Terry, what's up?
Hey, Tom, good. I just wanted to say, do it for Joe. Harris, Bernie. Super.
Harris, you think Kamala Harris should pick Bernie as her running mate?
Yes, I do.
I love Bernie, but he's 83 years old, and I don't think he's even interested in the job right now.
He's 82, or is he 83 now?
I think so. I think he said that on television a couple days ago.
It would also speak to the ageism and the slime job, the hack job they did to him on the press.
Yeah.
To Joe.
Yeah, the New York Times in particular.
I'm telling you, Joe should still be there, but I'm glad he stepped down, and it's great. But why not have the super ticket? Sanders,
Yeah.
With
it ain't going to happen, Terry. But Bernie was on this show every Friday for 11 years. From the time we started this show in 2004 or 2003, right up until he hit the Senate. And I love Bernie. I love him as a politician, and I love him as a human being. I know him very well. And but I think that Bernie is quite happy being a senior senator right now. He's the grand old man of the Democratic Party.
We need him. We need him in the Senate, and he's done so much, really. But
good.
At the same time, this election, we need somebody who addresses these people direct.
I agree. We need and we need a solid. I think the big.
Harris is good.
Yeah, I think the big deal here is that Joe Biden is the first president since the Reagan era, and arguably since the last 2 years of the Carter administration, to repudiate neoliberalism. Jimmy Carter bought into neoliberalism in his last 2 years. And neoliberalism, I wrote this book, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism. It's been completely discredited, and yet so much of the world is still, working on austerity politics and all this other kind of stuff, trickle down and everything else. And Joe Biden repudiated that openly, and Kamala Harris is now doing the same. And in the VP stakes, she needs to find somebody who would agree with her on that specific issue. And so that's my concern. But as I said earlier, Lyndon Johnson was a conservative and a racist, and Jack Kennedy picked him, and he turned into one of our greatest presidents outside of the Vietnam War. But with the Great Society, so there's always hope. Terry, I got to run, but thanks for the call. Ed in Chicago. Hey, Ed, what's up?
Just had to tell you, I've never been so happy to be wrong in my life. I thought that if President Biden stepped down, I didn't think that Kamala Harris would receive the kind of support she has received. I thought if he stepped down that we're going to have a contested convention like we had in '68.
Yeah.
And that thought just terrified me.
That would be good for nobody, although there are a few wags out there on both the left and the right who are complaining about it.
Yeah, I'm not really concerned about them. I mean, the amount of support she has been receiving is just, again, I'm just so happy to be so wrong, because it really warms my heart to see the kind of support she's been having. Of course, November's a long way away. We got to heap it up, but this is an excellent start.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, Ed, thank you very much for weighing in. Peach in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Peach, what's up?
Hi, glad to be talking to you. I am a supporter of the Blue People's Campaign since it was Moral Mondays in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And what I've learned over the years is that black women have been carrying the Democratic Party now for decades.
True.
They do all the get out the vote, they do the souls to the polls. So that's who I think we should be choosing our vice presidential candidate. I think we should ask those black women organizers who they want to see and vote for and organize for.
Yeah, a couple of people have suggested Stacey Abrams, for example.
Pushed so far to the right that when people use the word moderate, I don't even know what they mean.
Yeah.
Let's excite our base. Let's reach out to the people who have actually been carrying the weight for so long. Yeah. That's what I want to do.
Okay, I get it. Peach, thank you very much. Wendy in Hopland, California. Hey, Wendy, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi. I wanted to weigh in about Tim Ryan in Ohio.
Okay.
And
what about him?
I thought I think he'd be a great VP pick. He's really pro-working class. It'd be a thumb in the eye of Citizens United.
Mm-hmm.
And I always liked listening to him.
Yeah, Tim and I used to. We've given a couple of speeches together. He's a meditator. He's been meditating for most of his life, and in fact, Marianne Williamson put on a gig that the two of us were speaking at, which is where I first got to know him. He's a good guy. He's a little more conservative than I am politically, but although like I said earlier, hope springs eternal. I think a lot. So okay, so that's your vote is for Tim Ryan. He's a good guy. Wendy, thank you. Darcy in Silver City, New Mexico. Hey, Darcy, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
Since we're talking about who would be good for vice president, I say Al Franken. Someone previously said Bernie Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
He'd be great too, but I understand about his age. But I think Al Franken would be great.
Well, Al's in his 70s. It's. And he's kind of been there, done that.
I'm in my 70s, so that's okay.
Well, so am I.
We're not in our 80s yet.
It's like I think that this is. I think Kamala Harris has the opportunity to have kind of a John Kennedy moment. You know, this new generation stepping up and taking over. You know, the end of the boomers and the beginning of something new in America.
Yeah.
And
yeah, no, I agree. I was ticked when they dumped on Joe Biden. I've always loved Joe Biden for at least 40 years, and it's like, oh, you're going to treat him just like you treated Al Franken. Bad on you, but I get it. Yeah. And I'm so happy about this whole turn.
Yeah, I get it.
And
okay.
Anyway,
yep.
That's to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Darcy. George in Coarse Gold, California. Hey, George, what's up?
Hey, Tom.
Hey, George.
Can you hear me?
Just fine.
Yeah, I wanted to put in a vote for Roy Cooper from North Carolina. He has a pretty progressive record. He went against the state legislature that wanted to limit people's ability to sue against the hog farm pollution.
Mm-hmm.
He vetoed that. Actually, he vetoed 28 bills in 2 years because the legislature was so heavily Republican.
Well, both houses are Republican.
And they overrode his veto. And he was overridden by the legislature 23 out of 28 times.
Whoa.
He also expanded Medicaid, so 600,000 North Carolinians could get Obamacare.
Mm-hmm.
And he's pretty, and also he's turned out, so he's available. It won't hurt, and we got to keep the senators in the Senate.
Oh,
he's saying we're going to put Mark.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. He's term limited. I didn't know that about Roy Cooper.
Yeah, and he's in his 60s. He's not that old, and he's a churchman. You know, he was a deacon in his church and all that stuff. So
yeah,
he's a real square shooter.
That's great.
Anyway,
great.
That's it.
George, I got it. I want to get one more call in here before the break. James in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, James, I got about 45 seconds. You got a quick one?
Yeah, I got a quick one. Of course, I'm calling from Columbus, Ohio, and I got a great pick for VP, but you may not have him. Sherrod Brown. We need him because he's our only defense against J.D. Vance. Yep. Jim Dave. By the way, that's what J.D. stands for, Jim Dave. We don't need Jim Dave making decisions for us.
Right.
And Sherrod Brown is my pick.
Okay, and Sherrod Brown is, another senator that I know well and personally, and I have so much respect for her. And his wife is incredible too. She's a journalist. She's really good.
He's tough. He walks the walk. He talks the talk. And I think he'd be willing to put his male privilege to work for a strong woman.
I think you're probably right. You're certainly right. You're absolutely right. James, thank you for the call. But like you said and somebody earlier said, we've got some really good senators that we need to keep in the Senate. James, thank you so much. It's 48 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in just a second here. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the sane among us. Yes, we are still here. Going no place.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Oh, Sean was just reminding me every time Sherrod Brown used to come on the program, we'd talk about the Eve of Destruction song, one of our favorites. Barry, what was his name? And welcome back, Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Well, how you doing, Tom? First off, I want to say that I was one of these people that was really skeptical about Kamala because not so much that I didn't think she was qualified. Kamala, I didn't think she was going to be able to get past the misogyny and the racism. But I watched her press conference in Delaware, and she was just so electric and so on spot. I think she can get past that.
I've told this story before, and stop me if you've heard me tell it recently, but back in 2008 or 2007, during the Democratic primary, I had the number one or number two guy who was running the California Democratic Party, or maybe it's split in half, the Northern California, but anyhow, he was a black guy. And he was like, one of the most senior officials in the Democratic Party in California on this program talking about Barack Obama's candidacy. And he was like, don't vote for him. There's no way he can win. America will never elect a black president. Don't vote for him in the primary. And I was not taking that position. I was a big fan of Obama, but it was a real interesting conversation. And it turned out he was wrong. Obama served 2 terms.
Well, Trump seems dead on the stand, and she's full of life.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think she's going to beat him easily. I think she's going to eat his lunch.
My pick for VP, although it'll never happen because she comes from California, would be Katie Porter.
Yeah, I love Katie Porter. She's incredible, and she's out of work right now. I mean, she probably has a job, but she's no longer in Congress because she gave that up to run for the Senate.
She could use the presidential bully pulpit to be the bulldog going after these Republicans because she's good at it.
There you go. Yeah, she is brilliant. I don't think it's going to happen, but she's brilliant. Mark, thank you for the call. Brandon in San Jose. Hey, Brandon, what's up?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me okay?
Just fine.
Okay, so the whole prospects of Kamala Harris winning being a viable candidate against Donald Trump. Let's not forget the fact that the president-elect of Mexico is a woman.
Yeah. Well, hell, Margaret Thatcher came in, took over the Great Britain in 1978.
That's right. And she was, fairly conservative at that time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, extremely.
Right. And also, I'm concerned with the fact that the right wing obviously is going to take pot shots at her sex life or her alleged sex life with.
Well, they're going to go after her for having dated Willie Brown and all that kind of stuff. Screw them. I mean, I don't think Americans are going to, it's going to sell well on Fox News. It already is. I mean, they're already throwing this kind of stuff out. But I don't think it's going to work. I really don't.
Well, it's incredibly sexist as well. It's like, you can't, And Americans are far past that, I think. We're not into this, women can't have a adventurous young life anymore.
Yeah.
This is just not going to fly.
I agree, and I also don't think the attacks on her gender, I don't think the attacks on her race, I don't think the attacks on her immigrant parents, I don't think any of this stuff is going to stick. It's a new America. It really is. At least enough of America is a new America that the old Willie Horton stuff ain't going to fly anymore. It just isn't. It isn't. I know they're going to try it. I know they're going to try it.
Didn't Obama win by a landslide in 2012 against Mitt Romney?
Yeah, I don't recall the numbers, but he did pretty good. So yeah, there you go. Brandon, thank you very much for the call. It's 52 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in. We got a live read here, right, Sean? I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stay tuned. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag you're it. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically, just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
In the heart of our hometown, where the streets are bustling around, we gather neath the morning sun. Together we can get things done. Every voice, every hand, together we can make a stand. Tag your it, let's join the fight for our future.
And welcome back. 54 minutes past the hour. David in Bainbridge, Georgia. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I'm first time caller. I just want to say the most perfect VP we could ever choose. Actually, he would be great president. but that's already been settled. But he would be the best VP, and that's Russ Feingold.
Russ Feingold?
From from Wisconsin.
Yeah, I think he's well out of the political circus, as it were. But Russ Feingold was and is a good man, and he was a great politician. So, David, thank you for that. That was a good one. Barry in Bellingham, Washington. Hey, Barry, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I would like to throw another name into the hat for possible vice president.
Okay.
Jay Inslee.
Oh yeah, Jay is good, and he's leaving Washington State. He's term limited out, isn't he?
Right.
Yeah.
And he's really, his big passion is climate control.
No, he's great.
And he would really take on the fossil fuel companies.
He would. Your governor is a man of great integrity. Barry, thank you for that. Roosevelt in Chicago. Hey, Roosevelt, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
I got a pick for you that has name recognition. I haven't analyzed it from a geopolitical standpoint, but I think Elizabeth Warren would be a very good running mate.
You know, Elizabeth Warren was my #1 pick in 2000 in the primaries, and I'm such a fan of hers. But from what I'm hearing, I saw her interviewed last night. I think it was on MSNBC. She doesn't have any interest in that. She's also a boomer. I mean, she's also at or near 70, if not a little older. So, but Roosevelt, I love her. I'm with you. She'd make a great vice president, great president. Roosevelt, thanks a lot for the call. And thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you, and stay safe.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Progressive Plan to Pull America Back from the Brink by Thom Hartmann. And this is from Chapter 2, The Economy. The epigraph Woody Guthrie's saying, some men rob you with a six-gun, others rob you with a fountain pen. The title, the opening part of this chapter, The Coup of the Elites. The election of 1992 pitted Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. While Bush was running as a conservative who was compassionate enough to hope for 1,000 points of privatized non-governmental light, Clinton campaigned as an unabashed FDR, believing in government as a solution liberal. In language reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Square Deal and FDR's Progressive New Deal, Clinton proposed a new covenant between the U.S. government and U.S. citizens. In a speech at Georgetown University on October 23, 1991, he declared, "We've got to rebuild our political life before the demagogues and the racists and those who pander to the worst in us bring this country down. People once looked at the president and the Congress to bring us together, to solve problems, to make progress. Now, in the face of massive challenges, our government stands discredited, our people are disillusioned. There's a hole in our politics where our sense of common purpose used to be. To turn America around, we've got to have a new approach, founded on our most sacred principles as a nation, with a vision for the future. We need a new covenant, a solemn agreement between the people and their government to provide opportunity for everybody, inspire responsibility throughout our society, and restore a sense of community to our great nation. A new covenant to take government back from the powerful interests in the bureaucracy and give it back to the ordinary people of our country." More than 200 years ago, our founding fathers outlined our first social compact between government and the people, not just between lords and kings. More than 100 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave his life to maintain the union that compact created. More than 60 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt renewed that promise with a New Deal that offered opportunity in return for hard work. Today, we need to forge a new covenant that will repair the damaged bond between the people and their government, restore our basic values, embed the idea that a country has the responsibility to help people get ahead, but that the citizens have not only the right, but the responsibility to rise as far and fast as their talents and determination can take them. And most important of all, that we're all in this together. We have to make good on the words of Thomas Jefferson, who once said, "A debt of service is due from every man to his country, proportional to the bounties which nature and fortune have measured to him." End of quote from Bill Clinton. Americans loved it. A majority of voters in 1992 were old enough to remember what America was like under the 1940 to 1981 New Deal era, when a single worker with a good job had health care, a pension, and could raise a family and buy a home. When the GI Bill educated millions, when hospitals and health insurance companies in nearly every state were required by law to be not-for-profit corporations, and health care was inexpensive and widely available. And they noticed that the 12 years of Reagan and Bush had begun the process of shattering that historic era, that the middle class was slipping away, the government had become remote and hostile rather than protecting the rights of workers and the middle class. Americans elected Clinton based on his FDR-style rhetoric. They were looking forward to a return to the golden age of America's middle class. They were ready for the new covenant, and apparently so was Bill Clinton. There is every sign that he actually believed his own rhetoric. On all this, he won the election in November and spent that month and December preparing his new covenant programs to restore the American middle class. Until January. As Adam Curtis brilliantly points out in a special documentary series he did for the BBC titled The Trap, a few weeks before Bill Clinton was to be sworn into office as President of the United States, he was visited by Goldman Sachs CEO Robert Rubin, who had just taken a $40 million paycheck for his last year with Goldman and would soon become the head of Clinton's economic team tasked with carrying out the new covenant, and with Alan Greenspan. Rubin and Greenspan sat the young new president down and told him the facts of life as they saw them. Clinton would not govern as an FDR liberal. Instead, he must cut government, promote free trade, and reduce regulation of business. Clinton complied and has been richly rewarded. In his second inaugural address, he declared, "The era of big government is over." The philosophy represented by Rubin and Greenspan doesn't believe in government as a solution to much of anything other than wars and crime. As true classical conservatives in the mold of Sir Edmund Burke and Thomas Hobbes, many modern libertarians and neoliberals don't even believe in democracy. As any libertarian will honestly admit, they call it the tyranny of the majority, or mob rule. Instead, because they believe in the inherently evil nature of most humans, they held that a small ruling elite of good people, the wise ones, must concentrate wealth and power, the first fuels the second by and large, in a small number of hands, out of the reach of what the first American conservative President John Adams called the rabble, us. They believed that social stability was more important than social mobility. As of this writing, the surest way to become wealthy in the United States or Britain is to be born to wealthy parents. The surest way to be poor is to be born to poor parents. Social mobility, the ability to move between classes for better or worse, has been rolled back from its highly fluid levels in the 1940 to 1980 years to a rigidity last measured in the 1920s as America was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. Conservatives and Sir Edmund Burke's opposition to the Revolutionary War of 1776 to today's opponents of labor rights believe that too much power and wealth in the hands of the middle class will inevitably lead to instability. The book, Threshold, The Progressive Plan to Take America Back from the Brink.